Some books teach, others inspire, but a rare few transform. Since the dawn of time, humanity has searched for the divine spark within. Prophets, sages, mystics, and visionaries have all sought to decode the ultimate mystery. What does it mean to think like God? Is it truly possible to align with the infinite mind and shape reality from the spirit? This is not an ordinary book. It is a portal, a bridge between your human awareness and the thought of the Most High. Inspired by the timeless teachings of spiritual pioneer Emmet Fox, this manual was not designed merely to be heard, it was created to be lived. Within these pages lie not hollow formulas, but eternal principles, capable of awakening the sleeping soul and unlocking the wellspring of infinite power within. Prepare to encounter the spiritual laws that govern the universe, laws that, once understood and applied, can heal, prosper, liberate, and elevate. This is a map to your true self, a journey into the Creator's mind, an initiation into the art of manifesting from truth. If you are ready to think not as a man, but as God thinks, and to leave behind limitation, fear, and doubt, and to reclaim your spiritual inheritance of power, then listen with an open heart, because you are about to step into the frequency of the Most High. You are God's, says the psalmist. With those two words, the Spirit lifts the veil and reveals the root of all human power. The Bible is not a chronicle of distant events. It is a portrait of the mind thinking in God, or apart from Him. When Jesus repeats that verse before the Pharisees, He forever seals a fundamental truth. Divine creation is not a privilege of the few, but an inner law of every creature. New Thought rekindles that spark and turns it into a method. We have learned that prayer is not supplication, but affirmation, that visible reality obeys the invisible model, and that when man accepts his condition as a son, he receives the key that opens every door. This book develops that spiritual science step by step. I do not seek to persuade you with theories, but to lead you into practice. Each chapter is a tool. Use it today, use it now, and the inner omnipotence will respond. To think like God, the key to inner omnipotence. Based on the teachings of Emmet Fox, we've noticed that over 80% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to continue creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1. You are God's, your potential revealed. We begin with a clear affirmation. You are the individual expression of the infinite principle. All of Scripture revolves around this fact. When the psalmist proclaims, I said you are God's, and all of you are children of the Most High, Psalm 82:6, he is not praising a spiritual aristocracy but pointing to the very design of creation. God can only produce after His own likeness. Therefore, every human being, even in ignorance, contains the seed of omnipotence. Look at the child building sandcastles. While imagining, he reigns. If the wave washes his castle away, he doesn't cry for long. He simply rebuilds it. Why? Because in his mind, the idea precedes the form. The adult forgets this law and becomes a slave to appearances. Become like little children, Jesus taught, meaning recover the creative and free consciousness. Genesis allegorically describes the same principle. Let us make man in our image. The word image implies idea, model, resemblance. It indicates function and operative power. The Edenic drama that follows does not narrate the fall of a perfect being, but the misplacement of attention. To eat from the tree of appearance, to know good and evil as absolutes, is to let the dual mind replace the single vision of God. From that moment, man works by the sweat of his brow, struggling against a world he unconsciously projects. New Thought restores the order. Change the cause and the effect will follow. When you understand your divine sonship, you stop begging for outer solutions and begin exercising inner dominion. You do not deny matter. You redeem it, showing its true place as symbol, not master. But many object, I feel weak, guilty, limited. How can I affirm that I am God? I answer with the parable of the beggar and the inheritance. A man, unaware of his lineage, lived off alms. Upon his death, he received the news. He was heir to vast lands. The news didn't create the inheritance, it revealed it. Likewise, truth does not make you a child of God. It informs you of what you already are. Your task is to accept it, even if sensory reason protests. Acceptance does not mean vanity. It means recognizing that the power that formed galaxies dwells in your consciousness as a present law. That's why Jesus said, "The Father who dwells in me, he does the works." The principle is clear. God is the only cause, man the only channel. When the channel aligns, the impossible retreats. Let us pause on 3 practical consequences. Authority over thought. If you are a child of the Most High, your mind cannot be a dumping ground for fear or resentment. Every thought is a seed, every emotion, the rain that makes it sprout. Watch what you plant. Elevated self-concept. You are not the product of chance nor the victim of inherited temperament. You are a center of divine expression. Elevate your concept of yourself, and your outer world will reorganize to reflect it. Creative responsibility. The title of child implies service. Knowing your thoughts influence the collective, you consciously choose good. There is no such thing as isolated thought. Someone may ask, where will I see signs of this divinity? Look at the acorn. It appears inert, yet it contains 1,000,000 times its volume in wood. The inner divinity acts the same. It begins in the invisible, breaks the shell of old belief, and in fertile soil becomes visible strength and abundance. Your responsibility is to prepare the soil. Right thought, harmonious emotion, coherent action. You may argue, I've tried thinking positively and problems persist. Remember, a garden is not freed from weeds with one cleanup. Mental discipline is ongoing. The old habit had years to root itself. The new direction requires perseverance. Truth doesn't delay. Human mind does. Persist and you will see the harvest. Let's examine a case. During the recent decade of economic hardship, what the press called the Great Depression, I've seen jobless men regain their livelihood by accepting this principle. A desperate worker once came to me. I told him, "You are not looking for a job. You are looking to express God's abundance. Say this with me. The Spirit of abundance works through me. My perfect place is revealed now." A few days later, he received an offer in a workshop better than the last. A miracle? No. A mental law in action. It's important to underline, divine sonship does not abolish human law. It transcends it without violating it. Fulfill your civil duties, but do so with the awareness that God works in all. That's how structures are transformed without conflict. Remember Joseph in Egypt, slave, then administrator of the kingdom. As he rose, he kept his inner vision, and the vision attracted the circumstances. Exercise for the week. Every night before sleeping, calmly repeat, I am a child of God, heir to all good. My world reflects this truth. Let the phrase sink in like gentle rain. Do not analyze, do not debate. Allow the subconscious to imprint the seed. Upon waking, say, today I will manifest my divine sonship in thought, word, and deed. Watch the changes. You may fear falling into pride. Remember, pride compares. Christ consciousness identifies. The more you recognize your divinity, the more humble you become, because you'll see the same spark in every brother. The Christ in me greets the Christ in you. That is true brotherhood. Let us conclude this chapter with an affirmative prayer. Prayer. Our Father, source of all life, I recognize your presence in my mind and heart. I know you created me in your image and likeness, and I now declare that your power acts in me without obstacle or delay. Illuminate every thought, purify every feeling, guide every action, so that your glory is reflected in my life and in the lives of all around me. So it is, and so it shall be. Chapter 2. Let the principle of I am. When Moses approaches the mystery of the burning bush and asks the name of the one speaking from the flames, he receives a disconcerting answer. I am who I am. This phrase, which in the original Hebrew corresponds to a verb in the continuous tense, does not describe a person or a static title. It expresses pure existence, self-sufficiency, without external cause or possibility of lack. With it, the text declares that supreme reality is not defined by adjectives, but by being itself. New Thought has understood that by pronouncing I am, any individual contacts that same creative core that burned without being consumed in the desert. Just as the fire of the vision did not depend on wood to sustain itself, the divine spark of I am does not depend on material conditions to act. It is enough to recognize it and act from it. Let us pause to consider what we truly affirm when we say I am. It is not a simple pronoun joined to a copulative verb. It is the declaration of existence that precedes any attribute. Before saying rich or poor, healthy or sick, successful or failed, the mind uses I am as an invisible support that confers reality on the added quality. For that reason, the following word becomes a seed of certainty. It receives the wise creator of being and germinates according to its kind. If we add a limiting qualifier, we attract limitation. If we add an attribute of fullness, we precipitate fullness. The mechanism operates with the coldness of physical law, although its results may seem miraculous to the untrained eye. I have seen men turn the phrase, "I am incapable," into a chain that immobilizes their will for years, and as soon as they change the internal verdict to "I am competent," observe how the same hidden capacities reorganize and flourish under identical circumstances. Now then, why do we so easily accept negative identifications? The reason is historical. We grew up hearing that human beings are weak and imperfect, and we inherited mental images of collective guilt that become embedded in the subconscious. These images, although not explicitly named, continue to act. Each time we face a challenge, the latent memory whispers, "I am inadequate," and the obedient mind projects the corresponding movie on the stage of events. As long as this record is not rewritten, no external technique will reverse the effect. That is why Scripture insists on renewing the understanding. The "I am" always works, and if we do not consciously direct it, inherited suggestion will direct it for us. This is the root of scientific prayer, not to persuade a distant God, but to re-educate the internal creative center so that it expresses the truth of its origin instead of the fantasy of fear. Let us imagine a telegraph station, such as those used abundantly in the first half of this century. The operator inputs a specific code, and instantly the signal travels thousands of miles of wire, reproducing at the other end an exact message. The code may consist of a brief pattern of taps, yet it transmits instructions that mobilize goods, troops, or capital. The "I am" behaves the same way. It is the master key that opens the universal network of energy and form. Trying to change life without using the key is as useless as striking the telegraph apparatus at random, hoping that an intelligible telegram will arrive. Many men pray, work, or struggle without first placing themselves in the correct spiritual identity, hence the inconsistency of their results. Those who, on the contrary, establish themselves first in the "I am" consciousness, and then designate the desired good, discover an almost mathematical precision in the law's response. Therefore, it is advisable to examine the grammar of our daily thoughts. It is not enough to say aloud several affirmations in the morning, and then spend the day repeating opposite formulas mentally. The internal dialogue, even if silent, constitutes the primary broadcast that the subconscious records. A merchant may say in Sunday class, "I am prosperous," and in the shop murmur 20 times, "I can't handle so many expenses." This is going from bad to worse. The dominant effect will be the latter, because it carries greater emotion and is repeated frequently. The law does not distinguish tone or courtesy. It obeys the prevailing feeling. That is why Jesus warned, "Can the spring give both fresh and bitter water?" Whoever desires fresh water selects its channel from the source, not attempting to change the current downstream. You may ask, is it not arrogance to affirm "I am powerful"? Let us answer with the image of a mirror. Suppose a man contemplates his reflection and declares, "This figure I see is mine." He does not presume to have created the mirror, he simply recognizes the form that the glass reproduces. Similarly, when we say "I am strong," we do not attribute power to our personal ego, but reflect the vigor of the presence dwelling within us. Pride boasts of a finite force that competes. True identity recognizes an infinite force that shares. The clearer one understands the principle, the less desire one has to compare with another, because one understands that both drink from the same source. Here is revealed the meaning of genuine humility, not denial, but correctly positioning oneself as a transparent channel. Now let us consider the reverse of the principle, narrative self-definitions. When the sick person proclaims, "I am diabetes," or the student repeats, "I am clumsy in math," they are tattooing the condition on the same mold that could receive the solution. It is not a question of voluntary foolishness. It is about using the denominating faculty in the correct order. The medical diagnosis describes a transitory state. The "I am" describes the permanent essence. Merging them in the same phrase confuses levels and freezes the illness. Healthy practice consists of accepting facts as temporary messengers while reserving the I am for attributes consistent with the perception of the principle. I am health, I am intelligence, I am balance. In doing so, we do not ignore the symptom. We introduce a new cause which, sustained long enough, will reconfigure the manifestation. The subconscious, as even contemporary psychologists teach, operates as a faithful recorder. It does not analyze the logical truth of the impression received. When it hears I am, it opens the door without asking for credentials and stores the phrase in its deep chamber. Then it activates physiological, emotional, and circumstantial processes that reaffirm the order. Even if the conscious mind forgets the declaration, the underground file reproduces it as impulses, preferences, and apparently chance events. Knowing this mechanism is equivalent to possessing the key to inner omnipotence. Ignoring it exposes the individual to every wind of their collective management. Hence the urgency of reviewing the charity of the internal discourse we allow ourselves to express. Allow me to illustrate with a domestic example. A middle-aged woman told me that every time she cooked, she unconsciously repeated, "I am a disaster in the kitchen." She had heard it from her mother during childhood, and the phrase became an emotional refrain. As expected, the stews burned, the cakes did not rise, the sauces broke. I asked her to immediately replace the expression with, "I am harmony and order in my kitchen." At first she felt ridiculous, however she persevered. In 3 weeks her preparations improved remarkably, to the point that her family began asking for recipes. When the I am changed, latent skill emerged without external classes. The principle knows no small tasks. It governs all the duties of daily life. This brings us to the inductive question I want to leave you with. What qualifiers do you continue to attach to the I am throughout your day? Make a rigorous inventory. Listen to your spontaneous exclamations, especially when something surprises you. It is in those immediate reactions that the engraved image is revealed. Do not be discouraged if you find habits of self-deprecation. Becoming aware already begins the healing. Start at that moment to replace each limiting formula with another that expresses the divine ideal. Do not ask your mood for permission. Act. The favorable feeling will build over time like music accompanying lyrics after several rehearsals. One crucial point remains to be clarified: the difference between repeating a phrase mechanically and embodying it. The power does not reside in the sound vibration or the number of repetitions, but in the silent understanding that sustains them. Therefore, before pronouncing your affirmations, pause for a few seconds and remember that I am is the name of God operating within you. Feel the life current beating behind the word. Then add the attribute with calm conviction, avoiding the tension of one trying to convince a capricious judge. Recognize that the decree is already fulfilled on the invisible plane, and that the visible circumstances will organize themselves accordingly to reflect it in due order. Let us examine the principle in light of logic. If the cause is mental and the mind functions through identification, I am. To deny this law would be to deny the very possibility of reflective thought. To affirm, I am aware of thinking demonstrates that every idea about ourselves is formulated through the same structure. To deny the omnipotence of I am would be to accept that the defining faculty lacks effect, which contradicts our daily experience. Every decision we make, every bodily gesture stems from a prior self-definition, even if instantaneous. The foundation, therefore, is not based on vague mysticism, but on observing how consciousness precedes the event in all observable orders. The social projection of this principle deserves mention. When you elevate your individual conception, you contribute to elevating the collective conception, for the universal mind records your new pattern and offers it as a possibility to others. Wars and economic depressions begin in crowds that unknowingly accept a fearful, lacking, hostile I am. Peace and prosperity begin with individuals who internally uphold a loving, abundant, fraternal I am. Every thought founded on divine identity circulates as a current of light that neighbors can tune into. This is how we collaborate in the practical establishment of the kingdom of God, not through coercive proselytism, but through the natural radiance of our rectified consciousness. To close this chapter, I propose a continuous application exercise. For the next 7 days, select a specific area you wish to transform: health, finances, relationships, and write a brief affirmation starting with I am, followed by the corresponding perfect state. For example, I am abundant provision now manifested, or I am the life of God renewing every cell. Repeat the phrase slowly and attentively upon waking, before each meal and before sleeping. Do not ask for instant results. Affirm completed results in the divine mind and observe the peace that follows. Keep a small notebook handy and note every time you observe a change, no matter how small, in your attitude or circumstances. At the end of the week, review the list. You will be surprised by the many signs confirming the law's action once the correct password is given. Finally, I invoke the blessing that springs from the sacred name. Eternal Father, I am your living expression. I am intelligence, I am love, I am power. From this moment, my words reproduce your truth and my actions confirm it. By recognizing your presence as my identity, all fear dissolves, all doubt clears, all lack is filled. I am the channel through which your inexhaustible good flows and blesses every creature that crosses my path. So it is because I am. Chapter 3, the mind of Christ. When the Apostle Paul affirms to the Corinthians we have the mind of Christ, he is not stating an exclusive privilege of initiates, but rather describing the spiritual architecture to which every human being can deliberately access. The phrase, examined through a metaphysical lens, indicates that there exists a pre-established mental model, the mind of Christ, which functions as a perfect template for perception and action. Even when ordinary reactions seem dictated by instinct, each person possesses the faculty to raise their focus from the fluctuating psychic level to the immutable Christic level. By doing so, they embody the omnipotence we saw declared in previous chapters. Understanding the difference between common thoughts and the mind of Christ is therefore the logical next step following the assumption of the I am, because it gives content and objective direction to the newly accepted divine identity, transforming it from a generic declaration into a practical horizon for every circumstance. It is important to clarify from the outset that we are not talking about a devotional copy of the personality of Jesus of Nazareth, nor about externally reproducing the customs of his time, his clothing, or his rigid pedagogical methods. Jesus was the visible historical manifestation. Christ is the timeless internal dimension. Just as projected light takes the shape of each window without ceasing to be light, Christ expressed himself through Jesus with full intensity in that case. However, the pattern of that consciousness, unified vision, unconditional love, authority over form, remains intact, resting as a latent option in the psyche of every man and woman. Whoever affirms themselves as a child of God recognizes the inheritance. Whoever cultivates the mind of Christ invests the inheritance and produces yield. The difference between theory and power is measured exactly in that change of mind that Paul proposes. Let us then ask, how did Christ think in the face of concrete challenges? The Gospel account answers with specific scenes. In the storm on the lake, the crew struggles and cries out. Jesus sleeps because his mind rests in the certainty that the universe is orderly. When awakened, he does not analyze the direction of the wind nor consult astronomical charts. His first act is to calm collective fear. Then he commands the sea, "Be still, be silent," a phrase reflecting divine mastery over appearance. Let us observe the sequence: inner rest, verbal authority, external manifestation. Such is the Christic engineering. The same happens in the multiplication of the loaves. Instead of checking prices or carts, he asks the crowd to recline. A symbol of prior surrender, he gives thanks, alignment with the source, and distributes what he has, operative trust. Mental order precedes phenomenal abundance. Whoever assumes this model instantly understands that every visible problem is a frozen effect of a dualistic idea, and that the genuine solution emanates from looking with the undivided eye that recognizes no opposition between the Father's will and present need. It is important to emphasize that the mind of Christ does not ignore appearance, but refuses to grant it intimacy. When Martha laments the death of Lazarus, Jesus does not mix in escapist slogans. He weeps with the family, demonstrating full sensitivity, but immediately shifts his focus to the causal level, proclaiming, "Father, I thank you because you always hear me." This anticipatory gratitude reveals the conviction that life never ceases, it only changes its mode of manifestation. Then he calls his friend by name, for Christ recognizes individuality and rescues it from oblivion without absorbing it. Thus, the operative principle is illuminated. Compassion joins certainty, Human emotion rises without denial, and the creative word seals the command. Rereading each miracle through metaphysical lenses amounts to dissecting the exact laws of the Christic mind, just as an electrical engineer studies a circuit diagram before reproducing it in their laboratory. On a practical level, assuming this mind requires continuous discipline of attention. The first step is to distinguish the inner voice that speaks from divine stillness from the multiple dry voices that arise from the past, education, and collective pressure. The Christic voice is serene, direct, without recrimination. It does not condemn, it reveals truth. It does not demand sacrifice, it calls for trust. When in the midst of your day a dilemma arises, stop your haste and ask the key question. Does this idea I am now contemplating arise from fear or from fullness? If you notice anxiety, you are hearing the old self. If you perceive a silent yes, even if your reason does not understand the mechanism, you are touching Christ. This simple act of discernment dissolves half of misfortunes, as it prevents decisions made under the hypnosis of panic. Scientific prayer here becomes a lucid pause, in which one aligns before acting, so that subsequent action does not contradict the internal design. One might object that such an exercise requires dead time impossible in modern life. Think of the frantic offices of Wall Street, or the industrial workshops that multiplied since the Great War. Yet experience shows that seconds of well-trained recollection suffice to reinstall the Christic frequency. Just as an expert telegrapher distinguishes in the murmur of several lines the code he waits for, the practitioner immediately picks up the correct vibration amid the bustle. For this, I advise installing small stations of silence throughout the day, upon opening your eyes at dawn, before attending to the first visitor, when sitting at the table, and especially before going to sleep. At each station, mentally repeat, "The mind of Christ guides this situation," and continue with the task. No need to dramatize. The law requires no solemnity, only coherence. Another essential facet is the conscious renunciation of guilt. Jesus, before the adulterous woman, does not validate the crime nor stoke shame. He declares, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Here the Christic mind reveals its modus operandi. It recognizes error as ignorance, offers immediate liberation, and urges constructive change. If you wish to use this pattern with yourself, cease mentally beating yourself for past failures, declare the purpose to learn, and move forward. Every prolonged self-reproach keeps the small self alive. Every acceptance of forgiveness restores the divine self. It is clear that the condemning voice never comes from Christ. It comes from the herd instinct that fears losing control. The moment you replace judgment with understanding, the emotional circuit deactivates and opens a crack for precise inspiration that solves the issue. I've seen businessmen on the brink of ruin adopt this inner stance, discard resentments towards partners, and achieve in weeks the financial restructuring that accountants and lawyers deemed impossible. It is equally unavoidable to mention the energy of service as a natural expression of the Christ mind. Jesus washes the feet of his disciples not as a humiliating ceremony, but to demonstrate that genuine authority is verified in the ability to uplift the other. Whoever thinks from Christ does not calculate what material advantage they will extract from each relationship. Rather, they examine what aspect of divine good they can give, and through that very giving they receive multiplied. The underlying logic is impeccable. The one mind can only recognize what it gives, so sharing fullness intensifies the awareness of possessing it. Ask yourself then, before closing a day, where today did I express the intelligence, kindness, or joy of the Christ who dwells in me? That filial audit, far from imposing a moral burden, will remind you of the creative function you came to perform, prevent you from falling into comfortable passivity, and sustain you in the frequency where resources come without violent effort. A practical reader might urge a systematic training method. I propose the technique of concordant images. Choose an evangelical scene, for example, the calm on the sea. In meditation, place yourself as an active participant. Feel the humid air, listen to the oars, observe the waves, then incorporate the serene presence of Jesus and allow his certainty to permeate your emotions. Next, transfer that atmosphere to a personal problem, a pending payment, a medical exam, a domestic conflict. Contemplate the situation from the same piece. Then say a short phrase that summarizes the solution, as perfect order manifests, and concludes. Repeat the exercise daily until a glimpse of that peace arises spontaneously when you recall the matter. That glimpse indicates your subconscious has already lodged the Christ template and will begin to produce visible changes. This is not blind management. It is spiritual engineering applied to the subconscious, which, being part of the universal mind, will coordinate unimaginable means to objectify the ideal. Let us not forget the expansive nature of this consciousness. Every time one of us adopts the mind of Christ amid a social crisis, we modify the collective mental atmosphere. This happened when certain visionaries during the recent economic depression refused to spread the scarcity psychosis. Their companies not only survived, but provided employment to hundreds, counteracting environmental fear. The group mind, like a sensitive ocean, records each focus of order and propagates it in waves. Whoever internalizes this responsibility stops lamenting the state of the world and begins to be a living point of restoration, without fanfare or propaganda, because truth acts with the silent precision of light that dissipates shadow without any noise. We close the chapter with an integrative three-step practice for the next fortnight. First week, observe and stop every thought of condemnation. Second week, immediately replace it with the affirmation, "The mind of Christ correctly interprets this scene." Third week, translate the new interpretation into a concrete action of mercy or order. Note the effects. You will see how the mental pattern consolidates, and with it the external evidence: peace in the body, clarity in finances, harmony in relationships. Such a sequence will confirm that there is no situation beyond the reach of the mind of Christ when installed as an ordering principle, and that every moment of ordinary life can become a source of miracles if seen with the eyes of the Son. Father of infinite wisdom, we now recognize that the mind of Christ is our true mind. We allow your unique vision to replace our fragmented perceptions. Where we saw conflict, we see your order. Where we feared loss, we see your abundance. Where offense caused pain, we feel your forgiveness. We commit to think, speak, and act from this consciousness, so that your kingdom may be expressed in our work, homes, and nations. So be it, because our mind and your Christs are one now and forever. Chapter 4. Mental Law and Divine Law. The entire visible universe operates through a dual mechanism. Mental law, which describes the way each image sustained by consciousness takes form, and divine law, which reveals the eternal intention of the principle to express only good. Understanding the harmonious relationship between both is equivalent to possessing the master plan of creation for the individual, upon discovering that their mind constitutes the hinge where the finite and the infinite unite, assumes not only the right, but also the duty to collaborate intelligently with the cosmic impulse. There is no act, circumstance, or sensation that is not the result of this co-participation. Therefore, the study of its mechanisms demands an almost scientific objectivity, free from superstition and sentimentality. Just as the physicist explains the fall of a body by appealing to gravity and not to luck, the metaphysician attributes every human phenomenon to the mental vibration that precedes it and to the divine law that sustains it, avoiding confusion between accidents and whims of a capricious God. We call mental law the principle by which thought united with feeling generates its equivalent on the phenomenal plane. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he, says Proverbs, and history confirms this assertion. Empires are born from the vision that leaders hold in their hearts. Inventions spring from the image that the artisan nurtures before shaping matter. Collective crises germinate in the panic that the masses feed during weeks of rumors and discussions. The mind, then, is not a vague cloud, but a generative matrix. Its products, although they take solid form, never cease to be projections of the original idea. However, such capacity could lead to chaos if there were no higher counterbalance ensuring universal coherence. That counterbalance is divine law, the innate tendency of the spirit to unfold order, beauty, and abundance. Analogous to the instinct that guides an acorn to become a tree and not a weed. Man, endowed with free will restricted to the field of appearance, may use his mind to sow discordant images, but cannot nullify the essential design of life, which will ultimately redirect every deviant attempt toward the common good, even if the corrective experience we call suffering is necessary. Let us see it through the metaphor of the river and the locks. The powerful and continuous current symbolizes divine law. It flows from the mountain of absolute being toward the ocean of manifestation, bringing nutrients to every valley. The locks represent the individual mind. They allow water to pass or stop it depending on the angle of the gate. If the operator opens only one side, the torrent swirls and undermines the embankments. If kept closed, the channel dries up and the fields wither. When opened wisely, the current irrigates the crops in just proportion. Nothing changes the generous nature of the water. What changes is the charity of service according to the attitude of the gatekeeper. Likewise, divine good is permanently ready, but its entry into concrete life depends on the mental positioning of the individual. Whoever cultivates thoughts of harmony aligns the gates and receives a gentle flow. Whoever harbors resentment introduces an obstructing angle and causes turbulence, which they then attribute to chance. Here is revealed the moral and practical importance of inner self-governance. Now then, what does mental law consist of in practice? It has three visible phases: attention, acceptance, and expectation. Attention concentrates the energetic lens on a specific point, focusing the plastic substance of thought. Acceptance impregnates that form with consent of reality, giving it life-giving warmth. Expectation holds the matrix unwavering until the invisible mold condenses its physical reflection. These phases occur even when the subject ignores them. Therefore, chronic fear produces its feared adversaries with millimetric precision, for it follows the same stages but with a negative imprint. Knowing the sequence, then, is not enough. It is necessary to choose content in accordance with divine law to avoid the paradox of using a perfect instrument in the service of a self-destructive cause. The Gospel of John gives us the formula: the Son can do nothing by himself, but only what he sees the Father doing. Translated to mental mechanics, it means, keep your attention on the perfection conceived by the principle. Accept that this perfection includes you. Wait without anxiety for its inevitable appearance. An inevitable question arises. If divine law always works for good, how do we explain natural disasters, disease, and injustice? The answer rests in the distinction between the universal plan and individual experience. The plan contains only fullness, but the human mind, by adopting beliefs of separation, generates projections of lack that clash among themselves, producing compromises we call catastrophes or epidemics. Such events are not divine punishment. They are statistical results of millions of dissonant thoughts interacting and eventually self-limiting. When a community raises its mental vibration through the practice of love and coherence, statistics shift favorably. Floods decrease, crime subsides. There is no magic or arbitrary intervention, only resonance between the matrix idea and the objective field. This is why Jesus linked individual healing to forgiveness and faith, two mental states that restore affinity with the divine law and allow the organism, a microcosm of the universal mind, to reorganize according to its perfect archetype. To translate all this into daily action, it is useful to adopt a method of constant verification. I suggest the triadic examination: predominant thought, associated emotion, and consequent gesture. At the end of the day, mentally review your main scenes. Focus the lens of memory on a financial matter, a health issue, and a relational event. Identify which image dominated your mental screen, what feeling colored it, and what action resulted. If the action showed tension or failure, return to the root thought and deliberately replace it with a vision that reflects divine law: abundance, vitality, harmony. Associate it with a feeling of gratitude. Imagine the corresponding behavior. Repeat the procedure until the subconscious replaces the old record. This exercise, practiced consistently, transforms life with the inexorability with which the seasons change the landscape. The most frequent objection is that such discipline diminishes spontaneity, that life should flow without so much scrutiny, yet it confuses freedom with carelessness. No one accuses the violinist who practices scales daily of lacking spontaneity. That practice enables mastery and improvisation at the concert. Likewise, the mental work of aligning with the law grants creative flexibility because it reduces internal resistance and lets the spirit act with its infinite imagination. The one who watches over their field of ideas does not become rigid. On the contrary, they become a pliable instrument in the hands of wisdom. Life then acquires a rhythm of synchronicities that the ignorant see as luck, but the student recognizes as a sign of communion with the divine flow. It is worth demystifying another stumbling block, the belief that repeating affirmations is enough to force the divine law and gain selfish advantages. Such an attitude clashes with the very principle it tries to use if motivated by selfishness. Thought carries vibrations of lack and fear, therefore producing finite, short-lived results, followed by an equivalent loss. The mental law will deliver what is requested in appearance because it does not judge morality, but the divine law, faithful to harmony, will rebalance the system, perhaps through breakdowns, setbacks, or disappointments, that force the individual to review their motive. From this, it follows that true prosperity does not seek advantage over others or nature. It seeks to manifest the fullness that by filial right belongs to all. When an industrialist, for example, assumes that their company is a channel of service as well as a source of legitimate profit, their prosperity stabilizes, labor quality improves, and the community grows. Harmonious exchange illustrates the synergy between both laws. The transition from theory to lived experience requires reasoned conviction supported by repeated observation. I suggest the reader perform a simple test for 30 days. Select a specific issue, say a difficult relationship with a colleague, and decree each morning, "The divine law of love and understanding now acts in our mind. The mental law reproduces that love in our conduct." Avoid internal arguments. Wait for the right circumstance. Act with courtesy. Observe the changes without exaggerating or diminishing their importance. At the end of a month, the results will constitute a personal testimony more eloquent than any treatise. This is how stable edification occurs, not on external authority, but on the direct experience of the principle. We finally reach the devotional aspect that unifies the process, conscious prayer. It is not begging for exceptions to the law, but recognizing its perfection and affirming our willingness to obey it. Each time we say, "Father, thy will be done," we renounce the narrow concepts of the personal self and open the door to the creative flow that knows more than we do. This intelligent surrender is not passivity, but supreme cooperation. For the individual mind rises above its limited horizon and places itself in the channel of the universal mind, from which come ideas that ordinary logic would never suspect. Whoever practices this prayer discovers that decisions arise with clarity, time seems to expand, and appropriate resources come effortlessly, like puzzle pieces fitting themselves together. Let us then reflect. The mental law provides the mold. The divine law provides the substance and kind direction. Rejecting one is like pulling a cart with only one wheel. Ignoring the other is like carrying barrels of fresh water while dying of thirst for not opening them. Integrate them. Instead, align the divine identity with earthly efficacy, becoming conscious architects of the good that has always longed to express itself. Whoever understands this ceases begging favors from the powerful of this world and dedicates themselves to sowing ideas of justice, beauty, and love, knowing that the harvest will come with geometric precision because the universal mind never mishandles the seed that right thought deposits in its bosom. Omniscient Father, we acknowledge that your law governs the universe with absolute perfection, and that our mind, aligned with you, transmits your order to every atom of our existence. We now declare that our thoughts are clear, our feelings noble, and our actions just, so that the river of your infinite good may flow unobstructed and fertilize everything we touch. So be it, for your mental law executes, and your divine law inspires. Chapter 5. Discipline of Thought. The human mind, like a fertile garden, unfailingly produces whatever is sown in it. And just as a responsible gardener daily walks the rows to uproot weeds and protect the useful seed, the spiritual student must practice constant mental hygiene to ensure coherence between the seed of truth and the outward fruit. It is not enough to intellectually understand the mental law, nor to enthusiastically affirm our divine affiliation. It is essential to guard the soil where such truths germinate, because experience shows that even the noblest vision can be choked by invasive thoughts if continuous vigilance does not exist. This chapter presents the practical method of that discipline, divided into 3 large interdependent tasks: establishing periods of inner silence, deliberately selecting the ideas we admit, and maintaining a permanent watch to detect and neutralize any infiltration of fear or resentment before it takes root. Let us begin with inner silence. In an age dominated by the clamor of factories, streetcars, and newspapers competing to shout the most alarming headline, the mind receives thousands of contradictory stimuli with no time to digest them. The result is a psychological smog confused with legitimate thought, but which actually contains no creative guidance, only an echo of collective distraction. The person who wishes to govern their destiny must daily reserve an interval, not necessarily long but sacred, to withdraw their attention from all external images and immerse themselves in the stillness where the I am can hear the soft voice of inspiration. This is not about passively emptying the mind, but exposing it to the ordering presence, just as a loom remains still for a moment before receiving the new thread that will complete the design. The practice can be done at dawn when the house sleeps and the city barely yawns, or at twilight when the last rays invite gathering inward. The important thing is regularity, because the mind, like muscle, strengthens with disciplined repetition, not with sporadic enthusiasm. During these minutes, one adopts a comfortable posture, relaxes the body without neglecting posture, and directs attention with calm firmness to a single affirmation that summarizes the central truth. God is my life, my intelligence, and my power. The phrase is held until every other image yields, and the resulting peace is allowed to permeate the deep layers of the subconscious. Those who persevere will discover that silence is not emptiness, but a matrix from which unforeseen solutions spring, later manifesting as opportunities, intuitions, or revealing coincidences. The second task consists of deliberate selection of ideas. The mind is not a neutral repository that innocently collects impressions like a camera. It is a living organism that digests, assimilates, and reproduces each concept in terms of feelings and actions. Just as a prudent person does not ingest food harmful to hygiene because they understand the law of metabolism, the metaphysical student rejects toxic thoughts because they understand the law of manifestation. This means denying entry to every conversation that glorifies misfortune, limiting the reading of morbid print, and above all, watching the inner dialogues which, without external censorship, tend to become gatherings of defeat. By consciously choosing ideas, one exercises the right of admission to the mental banquet and invites only guests who will contribute to the health and prosperity of the social and personal organism. To facilitate this task, it is advisable to keep at hand a notebook divided into 2 columns. In the first, write the ideas that elevate; in the second, those that would depress. At the end of the week, review the list and observe which column received more ink. The purpose is not to generate guilt, but to provide an objective mirror revealing imperceptible habits. For just as a drop of ink darkens a glass of clear water, a fear thought repeated 10 times a day contaminates the internal atmosphere, even if affirmations of faith are spoken the rest of the time. The third task, continuous vigilance, is the weld that integrates the previous 2 and grants them sustained effectiveness. Vigilance is not mental tension nor neurotic self-censorship. It is the alert attitude of the sentinel who, knowing the nature of the kingdom he guards, effortlessly distinguishes the legitimate imitator from the intruder. To cultivate it requires developing the habit of stopping the chain of associations before it becomes a downward spiral. When a discordant thought arises, it is neither violently fought nor allowed to proliferate. It is simply replaced immediately by its positive counterpart. If the mind murmurs, this will be difficult. The student affirms the power of God to facilitate this work. Now, if I fear becoming ill appears, it is declared, the life of God sustains me perfectly and vigorously. Instant substitution prevents the negative image from consolidating, just as pulling a young weed demands a light gesture, while removing an adult shrub would require a hoe and sweat. It is important to remember that the subconscious does not recognize irony or sarcasm. It faithfully reflects the dominant emotion of the thought, so it would be fatal to dress a negation with cynical humor, thinking it harmless. Disciplined consciousness, on the contrary, turns every exclamation into an intentional creative act. Many fear that such vigilance will make them heavy or artificial in social conversation. However, facts prove the opposite. Those who learn to watch their words and ideas radiate calm and joviality because they no longer waste energy in later remorse, nor in repairing verbal damage. Mental discipline, far from reducing spontaneity, liberates creativity by eliminating the self-destructive impulses that cloud the inspiring current. Just as the violinist tamed by technique can improvise freely, the mind habituated to order thinks with a fluency that seems miraculous to the untrained. Chroniclers tell that Michelangelo dedicated hours to polishing his sketches before touching the marble. Then, before the quarry, his hand moved with such certainty that spectators believed they witnessed an act of sudden inspiration. Similarly, the idea cultivated in silence and protected by strict selection projects, at the required moment with a precision that amazes those ignorant of the prior work. We cannot omit the emotional factor in this discipline. Thought is the vehicle, but emotion is the fuel. An idea impregnated with living conviction travels unsuspected distances, while the same idea held coldly barely takes a few steps. For this reason, mental selection includes the cultivation of coherent feelings, gratitude, trust, goodwill. Every time a person thanks in advance for the good they expect, they intensify the vibration that will attract its equivalent. When they cultivate goodwill toward an apparent adversary, they neutralize the current of hostility that could crystallize into open conflict. Emotional hygiene involves forgiving promptly, since resentment is toxic residue that raises psychic temperature and corrodes the noble part of the mind. Practicing forgiveness does not mean justifying the offense, but rather recognizing that no external violation deserves to contaminate the closed source of inner creativity. When Jesus instructs to forgive 70 times 7, he is not dictating mystical mathematics, but radical hygiene. It is better to clean frequently before the spiritual garbage rots and causes diseases of the body or economy. An objection may arise that discipline belongs only to aesthetes withdrawn from the world, since the merchant, the mother, or the laborer do not have long hours for introspection. Experience contradicts this assumption. Precisely those who handle a greater density of stimuli need, and therefore develop concise methods. A worker operating a press on an industrial line can take 3 seconds between one note and the next to mentally repeat their affirmation. The mother preparing food introduces gratitude into the dough. The merchant waits for the next customer while reviewing a phrase of prosperity. No extra hours are added to the schedule. Flashes of truth are inserted into the gaps of the day, just as an engineer reinforces a bridge by inserting strategic rivets that support tons without altering the structure's aesthetics. Thus, discipline becomes a way of life rather than an extraordinary practice, and the mind acquires a permanent tone of order that is not lost at the first surprise. At this point, it is helpful to offer a weekly exercise schedule to organize the practice. Monday is dedicated to observing the inner dialogue without intervening. The dominant phrases are noted. Tuesday introduces immediate correction of the negative concepts detected the day before, recording how many times this substitution occurs, not to compete with oneself, but to become aware of the real frequency. Wednesday expands the task to spoken words. Every discouraging expression is immediately rectified with its beneficial opposite. Thursday adds the emotional body through the decision to maintain a feeling of gratitude regardless of external indicators. When the mind wanders, it returns to the point, just as a violinist restarts the scale if the bow slips. Friday practices inner silence for longer periods, 20 minutes instead of 10, allowing peace to deepen. Saturday makes a written tally of achievements and celebrates with sincere humility, because joy strengthens the memory of success. Sunday reflects on the unity between individual mind and universal mind, honoring the invisible force that makes transformation possible. Then comes rest, because rest preserves the work and manifests trust in the law. After 4 weeks, the student will notice tangible changes in their environment. Above all, an internal sense of mastery that does not depend on external conditions, but on the awareness of having lit the lamp and taken the helm into their own hands. Some will ask how long this discipline must be maintained. I answer that there is no graduation after which it can be abandoned, because the mind continues creating as long as the heart beats. Just as bodily hygiene does not end after a fervent bath, mental hygiene requires continuity. It simplifies and softens with habit, but it is never suspended without consequences. However, what at first demands deliberate effort becomes second nature, and the moment arrives when constructive thought arises with the same spontaneity as the musician humming their favorite scale without noticing. That spontaneity is not a random gift. It is the fruit of conscious repetition of the thousands of micro-decisions that woven together form the fabric of a purified mind. Thus, we close this exposition, recognizing that the discipline of thought cannot be reduced to cold technique or severe moralism. It is the art of living, the science of freedom, and an act of self-love that expands into service to others. Whoever cultivates silence, selection, and vigilance becomes a focus of harmony wherever they go, because they radiate the clarity that brings order to confusion and the serenity that dissolves the storm. There is no higher privilege nor more urgent labor in these turbulent times than to discipline the mind, so it translates without distortion the music of the Spirit. Father of infinite goodness, we thank you as the teacher and accept the responsibility to use it with purity. May your wisdom inspire our silence, love guide our lesson of ideas, and your power strengthen our vigilance so that no shadow nests within the sanctuary of our soul, and we may offer the world the whole light that proceeds from you. So be it, and so it remains. Chapter 6, Scientific Prayer. Prayer, long misunderstood as a fearful plea to a distant power, is actually the deliberate act by which the human mind formulates and accepts the divine pattern it wishes to see materialized. For this reason, we call it scientific, not because it depends on laboratory instruments, but because it relies on constant, verifiable, and universal laws. This designation does not diminish its sacred nature. Rather, it elevates it by demonstrating that communion with God is not a mystical privilege reserved for a select few seers, but the right and responsibility of every rational being. Just as electricity responds to those who understand its conductors and fuses, prayer offers results to anyone, regardless of creed or culture, who practices its steps with understanding and persistence. This chapter presents the exact mechanics, step, timing, feeling, and provides clinical testimonies collected from hospitals, clinics, and mission halls, so the reader may discover that a well-made affirmation transforms tissues, finances, and societies with the precision of a mathematical formula applied to the living soul. The first step is gathering, a term that designates the transition from peripheral noise to the quiet center of consciousness. No current of power can be transmitted if the connectors are loose. Likewise, the distracted mind cannot sustain creative voltage. The practitioner then sets aside 5 to 10 additional minutes, if discipline allows, to suspend activities, sit comfortably, uncross arms and legs, and direct attention to the inner presence with the phrase, "Here and now, God is my life and my intelligence." Concentration is not forced. It is allowed to settle like a dove finally finding a quiet shelter. Slow breathing may be used, not as an esoteric ritual, but to signal the nervous system to leave external alertness and allow the blood to beat with a serene rhythm. The mind does not argue with arising thoughts. It observes them depart like clouds whose meteorological content is irrelevant to the pilot who rises above them. After a few days of practice, this initial silence takes hold in less time, and the prayerful person realizes they are not generating stillness, but releasing the stillness that has always been present beneath the sensory waves. The second step is identification. With attention gathered, the individual declares in the first person the universal truth corresponding to the matter to be harmonized. If the body shows disorder, they affirm, "I am God's perfect life flowing in every cell." If the economy shows deficit, they proclaim, "I am God's wealth manifesting now in exact ideas and proper channels." The key lies in using the sacred name, "I am," as a generative verb, never as an uncertain future or a pleading request. When pronouncing the phrase, the reality is felt as already fulfilled, not conceived as a remote possibility, but as a present fact, invisible to the senses, but tangibly alive in mental substance. Here lies the fundamental difference between scientific prayer and conventional petition. The former begins from the accomplished state, the latter begs for favors. The scientific prayer speaks from the altar of affiliation. The traditional supplicant shouts from the barrier of separation. That is why Jesus, before multiplying loaves, gave thanks. He saw the result as a completed fact. The third step is visualization, The human mind naturally thinks in images, so the verbal affirmation is clothed in sensory form so the subconscious can process the command with greater vividness. One visualizes not the process but the achieved goal. One who prays for health sees themselves walking upright, breathing lightly, performing tasks that once caused pain. One who prays for work sees themselves performing a useful function, receiving fair pay and giving joyful service. The image must be brief, clear, without theatrical dramatics that tire attention. Once seen, it is seated with the corresponding emotion, peace, gratitude, and then released like a farmer who, after planting the seed in well-tilled soil, does not uproot it every hour. It is a common error to confuse visualization with persistent fantasy. The first impresses the command. The second reveals doubt because the fantasizer fears the mold will disappear if they stop looking. Here, firmness intervenes, knowing that the image, once accepted, is left in the hands of the law to develop by paths that may surpass personal logic. The fourth step is release, consisting of consciously entrusting the result to infinite intelligence. One declares, "Father, thank you because this is done. Show me how to cooperate." This surrender does not abdicate the human right to act. Rather, it renounces dictating the exact form of the outcome. The farmer does not design the molecular sequence of the seed. He trusts the implicit wisdom within it. Likewise, the prayerful person, after affirming and visualizing, continues their journey with calm expectation, ready to follow internal perceptions that indicate the appropriate action. This expectation, not anxiety, keeps open the perceptive channel through which the spirit suggests calls, readings, visits, or timely rest. When the personal mind becomes impatient, one repeats, "The hour and the way belong to God. My part is to remain faithful." Such faithfulness prevents premature intervention that would mutilate the tender sprout before the harvest. Regarding timing, it is helpful to remember that the subconscious assimilates gradually. The simple morning affirmation sets the vibrational tone. Brief reviews at midday and in the afternoon reinforce the line. The nightly recap consolidates the sowing at the edge of sleep when the door to the deep repository of beliefs is ajar. Experience teaches that 3 or 4 daily sessions of 3 minutes each are more effective than an occasional marathon followed by hours of neglect. Regularity overcomes the mental inertia accumulated over years, just as continuous dripping water perforates stone, whereas a single hammer blow does little. The advanced student, after months of practice, concentrates the whole operation into a single act because their mind obeys promptly, yet that economy of energy cannot be reached without prior discipline. Let us move to clinical examples that illustrate the theory with tangible evidence. Case 1. Rheumatoid arthritis in a 60-year-old woman. The patient, a Brooklyn resident, experienced painful inflammation in both hands, diagnosed and reversible by her attending physician. She joined an affirmative prayer group and was instructed to repeat, "I am the perfect flexibility of God manifesting in my joints," accompanying each session with the image of her fingers moving freely as she strung flowers, an activity she had enjoyed before the ailment. She practiced the steps 4 times a day, 7 minutes each, for 6 weeks. By the end of that period, the pain had reduced by 60%, and within 3 months she could handle small objects unaided. The rheumatologist, surprised, concluded that the remission was beyond the usual prognosis. The patient attributed her improvement to perseverance in scientific prayer. Case 2. Gastric ulcer in a war veteran. The man, diagnosed with post-war stress, suffered periodic bleeding. Barbiturates gave only temporary relief. He was taught to pray with the phrase, "I am the perfect digestion of God, calm and complete." He planted the image of himself sharing a hearty meal without discomfort, gave thanks, and let go. After 4 weeks, the bleeding stopped. After 3 months, he ate foods considered irritants without relapse. His surgeon confirmed the healing and recommended continuing the practice as mental hygiene. Case 3. Financial crisis in a small printing business. The indebted business faced imminent closure. The owner, as if part of the social fabric, adopted the affirmation, "I am the unlimited provision of God in specific action for this printing shop." He visualized machines working at full capacity and bills paid on time. For 2 months, he sustained the 4-step practice. An unexpected government contract to print educational pamphlets arose from a recommendation he had not sought. He paid off debts and expanded his staff. This confirmed that scientific prayer, working on the mental substance, awakens objective channels that the anxious mind cannot conceive. These cases also demonstrate that prayer is not a substitute for medical intervention or honest human effort. It is the catalytic force that enhances both. The rheumatologist maintained clinical control, the gastroenterologist adjusted diet, the printer redoubled punctuality. The difference lay in the mental state that transformed limiting premises into convincing premises of success. From this arises the practical rule: pray, act, and witness. Those who pray but fold their arms become spectators of their own doubt. Those who act without praying use personal force that soon runs out. Those who pray and act witness results and strengthen collective faith. Now let us address common dangers. The first is impatience with timing. If the manifestation does not appear within the time frame expected, some declare failure and abandon the technique, ignoring that old records of fear have inertia like a heavy flywheel that takes time to stop, even when the power is cut. The second danger is dispersion. Practicing 10 different affirmations daily confuses the current, like planting wheat, barley, and orange trees in the same furrow. It is better to concentrate on one main idea until it crystallizes, then address another. The third risk is reverse superstition, the belief that the exact wording alone works miracles. Effectiveness rests on internal conviction, not phonetics. The phrase is scaffolding supporting emotion, and once the inner building is firm, the scaffolding can be removed without collapse. Some may ask about intercessory prayer. Can one pray scientifically for another without violating their free will? Yes, on condition that one affirms the perfection of Christ within them without dictating personal details. When praying for a sick friend, one proclaims, "The Spirit of life in John now expresses as perfect health." No demand is made that he take or leave any remedy, as that nuance belongs to his consciousness and the healing he receives. This mode, far from imposing, liberates the divine spark latent in the other, who may not even know someone prays for them, but will perceive a sudden uplift that aids recovery. Many sanatorium doctors, though not versed in metaphysics, confess that some patients show clear improvement after a loving visit from a relative. They do not realize the visit, acting as a channel of mental good, altered the room's vibratory atmosphere. Regarding timing of results, recall the agricultural analogy. Each seed has a specific germination period. Some matters, headaches, small family conflicts, respond in hours. Problems rooted in years, embedded in layers of the collective subconscious, may take weeks or months. The wise mind avoids measuring by the clock. It celebrates each small caress of progress just as a farmer celebrates a green sprout, confident the full ear will come in season. The celebration itself acts as fertilizer, injecting gratitude, which magnifies the returning current of good. Thus the summarized scheme remains: gathering, identification, visualization, release, disciplined regularity, and testimony. Practice without anxiety, with alert mind and trusting heart, and you will find prayer is applied science and art of living, a means by which humanity rises to its rightful rank as conscious cooperators with God. When these laws spread, humanity will see drastic reduction of psychosomatic illness, labor conflicts, and commercial wars, for each individual will experience within themselves the source of security now sought in barbed wire and bank balances. Then the Pauline injunction, "Pray without ceasing," will no longer sound exaggerated but will be perceived as a logical invitation to keep the current open, just as a power plant does not cut supply once the city's lamps are lit. Eternal Father, we recognize that your will is perfect good, and that the channel to receive it is conscious prayer. We now affirm that our word, united with your truth, produces life, health, and abundance. That our mind conceives the ideal, our heart accepts it, and our body manifests it. We give thanks in advance, knowing all is done in you, and we commit ourselves to fulfilling the acts your wisdom inspires, for the glory of the inner Christ and the service of all creation. Amen. Chapter 7. Creative Imagination. The mind possesses two great wings, thought and feeling. When both beat in unison, they soar to the plane where ideas condense into facts. This harmonious beating is called creative imagination, a faculty that most confuse with childish entertainment, or a romantic escape from reason. In truth, it is the mind's drafting room, where the imminent future is sketched before the hand carves the stone or the artisan adjusts the machine. However, the drawing must be made from the goal, not toward it. Visualizing toward the goal contains the seed of distance and delays the harvest. Visualizing from the goal turns the idea into an inner present that demands immediate expression. It is the same principle that governs a game of chess. The master contemplates the final completed position in his mind and works backward move by move to the reality of the board. Therefore, his pieces obey with mathematical precision. A common mistake is to imagine the process in excessive detail: the approved loan, the successful interview, the signing of the contract, while relegating the feeling of completion to a secondary place. In this way, the student unknowingly cultivates anxiety because each intermediate scene still depends on external variables. For creative imagination to be effective, it skips the steps and settles on the rooftop. It feels there the open air of the goal and then descends with confident steps, knowing the staircase already exists because the result presupposes it. When Jesus cried, "It is finished," he was not referring only to the overall spiritual work. He described the inner attitude that completes the task before seeing the stone removed. Whoever adopts this stance discovers that the mind generates unsuspected paths, for the accepted end becomes a magnet that restructures every intermediate event. It is important to distinguish between passive fantasy and creative imagination. Fantasy entertains the ego with castles that dissolve upon contact with routine. It lacks a firm emotional root and the decision to act. Creative imagination, on the contrary, impresses a command on the subconscious and awakens practical intelligence. It is recognized because it engenders active peace. The internal alignment feels so real that the student behaves coherently without conscious effort. It is the difference between dreaming that one plays violin in the Philharmonic and enrolling calmly in daily classes, because the internal concert has already taken place. That is why the great violinist Paganini said that before stepping on stage he would close his eyes and see himself acclaimed. Then the future ovation shaped his present pulse. To practice this art, we propose a sequence in 4 movements. First, clear definition of the goal. It is not enough to improve health, but to walk 15 blocks without fatigue and with free breathing. Second, installation of the scene. In silence, close the door and project the image on the inner screen, taking care to include sensory details: the smell of fresh air, the warmth of the sun on the skin, the rhythmic sound of footsteps, as such impressions multiply emotional intensity. Third, emotional immersion. Absorb the scene until you feel serene joy. It is not about jumping for joy, but experiencing the calm that accompanies a mission accomplished. Fourth, sealing with a word. A brief affirmation: "Thank you, Father, because it is done." This fixes the film and allows the practitioner to return to their affairs without fissures of doubt. 5 minutes suffice if concentration is clear. Prolonging the session when the mind disperses is counterproductive, as it introduces vibrations of fatigue. Some fear that imagination will confuse reality and fantasy. In truth, this confusion already operates continuously. Hypochondriacs fabricate symptoms doctors cannot find, and those fearful of ruin attract creditors, even with clean accounts. The objective then is not to prevent the mind from building, but to direct its construction. The engineer does not forbid the river from overflowing, he channels its course. Those trained to visualize from the goal replace inherited images of failure from habit or environment with scenes of success that the subconscious translates into body posture, tone of voice, and advantageous synchronicities. This explains why some exhibit the quality of inevitable success. It is not personal magic, but an internal scene repeated until it becomes atmosphere. Let us illustrate with a real case. A young typesetter wished to run his own workshop, but whenever he imagined it, the burden of debts and lack of machinery intervened. I asked him to paint another picture, to see himself in his print shop, surrounded by linotypes, hearing the steady hum, delivering bundles of brochures to satisfied customers. He had to envision himself at the end of the shift, counting the cash register with gratitude. He practiced 15 minutes at dawn and 10 before sleeping for 40 days. In the 6th week, an old retired boss offered to transfer his premises at a modest price, payable in installments. The young man did not manufacture the opportunity. He attracted it because his mind was already the print shop, and the universe was forced to fit the external form to the internal mold. He received, acted, prospered. Another example comes from medicine. A teacher suffering from stubborn eczema attended a consultation after exhausting treatments. She was taught to see herself with smooth skin, wearing short sleeves, strolling along the boardwalk without hiding her arms. At first, the itching flared precisely when she closed her eyes, a sign that the old image of irritation struggled to maintain control. She persisted. 2 months later, the lesions receded so much that the dermatologist, incredulous, asked her to explain the treatment. She replied, "I visualized the goal already achieved." It was proven that the epithelium obeys images lodged in the psyche, just as the economy obeys images of abundance. To increase effectiveness, the image must be repeated in a positive emotional state. Emotion is the ink that engraves the cliché. Reason alone is pencil marks the eraser of time blurs. Imagine an engraver striking metal. The heat impact fixes the relief. Similarly, joy, gratitude, and trust strike the invisible plate and leave a deep mark. It is useless to affirm, "I am prosperity," in a monotone voice if deep down you fear the next bill. The solution is not to fake joy, but to recall past experiences of success, soak in that sensation, and then project the new goal. Thus, authentic emotion will flow without violence, and the subconscious will recognize the familiar vibration already associated with victory. You may ask, what if the imagined goal implies harming another? Such a possibility reveals a coercive purpose incompatible with divine law. A mind that plans unjust advantage introduces fear of retaliation and thus contaminates the image with destructive residue. The result will be apparent success followed by an equivalent loss. Creative imagination, to operate without harm, must intuit the good of all involved. One who wishes to ascend in position visualizes triumph without demanding the painful displacement of a colleague. They see themselves leading a prosperous team with fellow members promoted in turn. In this way, the scene resonates in harmony with universal abundance, and the law responds without conflict. The ego calls this utopia. History proves that the longest-lasting enterprises are those where prosperity circulates, not those where it concentrates among a few. Auxiliary technique: the image board. Cut out photographs or draw symbols representing the goal: a bright house, stamped passport, vision of a harmonious family reunion. Fix them on cardboard and place it in a private spot. Each morning, observe the board for 30 seconds, not to wish but to assume, "This is mine now." Then look away and work normally. This procedure, applied during war by aviators wishing to return unharmed, showed a remarkable success rate. Pilots who kept a photo of home in front of their bunk and saw themselves already embracing their loved ones survived campaigns statistically deemed impossible. The anchored image in the psyche stimulated physical resistance, quick reaction, and the ability to decide a favorable maneuver under intense fire. An objection may arise that creative imagination fosters disappointment if facts delay. The antidote is to understand the difference between the harvest date and certainty of germination. A farmer who has sown wheat does not curse if the ear takes time. He trusts the cycles. So must one who sows images. Every sign, a letter, a meeting, an inspiration, is heard as a sprout and watered with gratitude. If the mind is restless, return to the matrix image and reinforce it. Not as an urgent act, but as a sunbath that strengthens the plant. Doing so avoids the poison of doubt, which is like pouring floodwater over a tender seed. Observe the evangelical recommendation. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. A single eye means unified vision, free of duplicity. Creative imagination demands precisely that simplicity. A single image maintained without internal competition. The person who imagines wealth today and laments poverty tomorrow creates light and shadow simultaneously. The result is chiaroscuro, emotional oscillation, months of plenty followed by periods of scarcity. The continuity of success depends on the continuity of vision. To consolidate the habit, I suggest the ritual of closing the curtain. Each night before sleep, the student reviews the accomplished goal on the inner screen for 1 minute, gives thanks, and imaginarily lowers the curtain. This symbolic act signals the subconscious to suspend all revision during sleep hours. The deep mind will process the order without interference. At dawn, it will raise the curtain with a brief evocation of the scene and step into the day. Within days, one will notice the waking life fills with dialogues, readings, and encounters aligned with the projected image. This is not benevolent chance. It is the retransmission the universal mind makes of the nightly script. Children are born masters of creative imagination. A little child who decorates himself with a towel as a cape and declares himself a general experiences the scene with visceral certainty. His pulse quickens. He commands invisible troops, and no external evidence persuades him it is just play. Not coincidentally, many achieve in adulthood vocations analogous to their favorite childhood fantasies. Adults, in contrast, have replaced mental plasticity with critical density called realism. Recovering creative imagination means reclaiming childlike freshness guided by adult understanding. It is not about evading responsibilities, but infusing them with vision. The builder who inspects plans with the eyes of a visionary child erects inspiring buildings. The one who sees only bricks piles soulless walls. To conclude, let us integrate weekly practice. Day 1, write a specific goal and formulate an image. Days 2 to 7, perform morning and evening 5-minute sessions, reinforced with a 30-second flash before lunch. Note any event that seems like progress. No matter how small, at the end of the week, read the list and give thanks. Repeat the cycle until manifestation culminates. Over time, the mind adopts creative automatism. When a legitimate desire arises, its conclusive image immediately forms, impregnated with gratitude. Then the individual lives, so to speak, ahead of their biography, and physical existence hurries to catch up with the previous film. Father of tireless light, we thank you, because our imagination is the brush with which we paint your beauty on the canvas of the world. We grant each internal image the dignity of being your work. We uphold it with faith, seal it with love, and confidently entrust it to the law that makes it visible. We declare that our eyes already see fulfilled what our hearts conceive, and all we conceive is good because it comes from you. Amen. Chapter 8. The Word of Power. Since the beginning of time, Hebrew tradition teaches that God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That inaugural verb lifts a veil on how absolute reality projects its qualities onto the visible stage. The conscious issuing of the word precedes the appearance of form. We are not referring to the mere physical sound that emerges from the lips, but to the mental decree, charged with conviction, that organizes the universal substance of thought and condenses it into tangible facts. The word, therefore, is not simply a vehicle of description. It is a generative instrument. Every time a person articulates a judgment about themselves, others, or circumstances, they dictate a sentence that the mental law executes with inexorable diligence. The purpose of this chapter is to expose the structure of that mechanism, to indicate the requirements that confer efficacy to the affirmative decree, and to warn about the dangers of using the tongue lightly, because a misdirected spark can ignite emotional fires as devastating as those that sweep entire forests in the Appalachian summers. To understand the creative dynamic of the verb, it is helpful to remember that thought resides in the mind as a contourless idea, similar to an electric current in a wire. The word turns it into an articulated vibration, comparable to the spark that jumps in a lamp and lights it. Not every spark illuminates. Some cause short circuits if the system lacks proper resistance. Likewise, a word lacking emotional backing barely causes sparks without continuity or organizing power, especially when the emotion supporting the statement is fear. The discharge fixes itself in the mental ether, and precipitation begins. This explains why a complaining mother repeating to her child, "You are clumsy," manages to encapsulate in him the belief of clumsiness that will accompany him for years, unless subsequent discipline reverses the fault. The principle makes no distinction between persons or qualifiers. It zealously provides the harvest of thorns or roses alike, depending on the seed sown in the word. Let us then analyze the elements of an effective decree. First, the formula must introduce the divine name, I am, or its implicit equivalent. This prefix connects the human word with the absolute origin, just as the plug of a cable connects the home appliance to the power plant generator. Second, the verb must be conjugated in the present tense, discarding phrases like, I will be, someday I will have, since verbal delays imply separation and postpone manifestation. Third, positive, concrete, and complete qualities are enunciated. I am perfect health circulating in every cell, not I am less sick, because the word less recalls the illness and perpetuates a vibratory residue. Fourth, it is pronounced with a tone of serene authority, without nervous shouting or timid whispers, reflecting the awareness of one who gives order in their own mental kingdom. The word exhales the attitude with which it is launched, and that attitude is worth almost as much as the syllable. Fifth, it closes with gratitude, the key that seals the circuit and prevents later leaks of doubt, since gratitude implies certainty of fulfillment. It is now fitting to unpack the difference between affirmation and mechanical autosuggestion. Scientific affirmation arises from intellectual recognition and emotional acceptance of a spiritual truth. Autosuggestion merely repeats formulas without digesting their intimate meaning, expecting phonetics to exert automatic magic. This confusion has discredited the practice of the word of power in some circles because cases are cited of those who recite, I am rich, while inwardly hurting with laments of scarcity. Naturally, money does not come, and skeptics mock the empty affirmation. Mental science responds that failure comes from the divorce between thought and emotion, not from the principle itself. For the word to precipitate reality, it must embody unified idea and feeling. If the mind doubts or the heart fears, it is advisable first to eliminate interference through forgiveness, meditation, or re-education, and then launch the decree. From the biblical perspective, we observe that Jesus never improvised long petitions. His method consisted of brief decrees full of authority. Stretch out your hand, rise and walk, you are clean. Previously, he had consciously established connection with the Father by withdrawing to pray alone. When he returned to the crowd, his word acted as an infallible dart because the emotional charge of certainty saturated each syllable. Such verbal economy teaches that the power of a decree does not depend on the number of words, but on the intensity of conviction. Just as a chemist titrates a solution with calculated drops, the metaphysician titrates the mind with precise phrases, avoiding diluting the force in rivers of verbosity. Now let us speak of rhythm. It is recommended to establish cycles of declaration, for example, 7 complete repetitions at dawn and 7 at nightfall, with a subsequent interval of silent attention during which the practitioner briefly visualizes the achieved result. That alternation of sound and silence imitates breathing. Exhale doubt, inhale certainty. Some will find it helpful to keep count with a knotted string or a small abacus, not out of superstition, but to ensure regularity and exact number, just as a pianist follows a metronome at the start of practice. The essential thing is that each repetition maintains emotional freshness. If they become a drowsy litany, it is better to pause, recreate the inner image, and resume with vigor. One might object that the spoken word can stumble upon the disbelief of listeners. Remember that the creative decree is spoken primarily to one's own subconscious, which holds the secondary matrix. The external audience is secondary. However, the social atmosphere influences if the practitioner repeats their affirmation before mocking people. It arouses contradiction that can infiltrate mental defenses. Jesus once ordered the unbelieving debtors to leave the house before resurrecting the sleeping girl, because hostile vibration hindered the operation. In our time, prudence advises making decrees in private, sharing them only with those who share the same CEO in adverse environments, pronouncing them internally, knowing that thought, even without physical sound, vibrates with equal power when conviction is firm. Let us see clinical examples that corroborate the theory. A patient with partial paralysis of the right arm after an industrial accident. Doctors predicted permanent reduced mobility. He was taught to declare 10 times every hour, I am the perfect energy of God freely moving this arm. He was advised to say it while accompanying the widest possible range of movement, at least minimal, to anchor the kinesthetic sensation. After 2 weeks, flexion increased. At 6 weeks, he lifted light objects. By the 4th month, a medical certificate confirmed almost total function. Doctors attributed part of the success to physiotherapy, but the patient himself confessed that without the word of power, he would have surrendered to pain and not followed the exercise routine. Thus, the decree acted as a spark that sustained morale, reorganized neuromusculature, and facilitated compliance with physical prescriptions. An economic case. A small bookstore in Manhattan faced a rent increase that exceeded earnings. Its owner adopted the affirmation, The word of God prospers this store. Every book finds its reader. Every reader finds their book, and abundance flows without fail. She repeated it 15 minutes before opening and 10 minutes before closing. She blessed every shelf in barely audible murmurs. Divine wealth flows. Within 3 months, a university professor offered a contract to supply course texts at preferential prices. Sales rose. The landlord proposed a long-term contract without further increase, and the bookstore survived, becoming over the years a center for literary gatherings. The story shows that the word, launched with conviction and backed by honest service, attracts unexpected opportunities. But the tongue also precipitates harm when abused. The preacher who vividly describes God's wrath or the horrors of hell sows panic that translates into neurosis or fanaticism. The merchant who repeats this goes from bad to worse, tracing in his accounts the exact downward curve he predicts. Collective slander, amplified by sensationalist press, generates a recession climate where people cut spending and paradoxically produce the crisis they feared. Thus, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. According to your words, so shall it be. Therefore, the conscious student refrains from spreading alarmist rumors, keeps silent, or counters with a broader vision. Self-verbalization is another matter. Impulsive exclamations like, "How stupid I am, I always get sick, I'm starving," install decrees the subconscious, incapable of irony, takes literally. It is advisable to immediately replace the outburst with the opposite phrase. I learn quickly, my health is robust, abundance sustains me. If the slip reached the tongue, it is corrected instantly. I was wrong, I cancel that word. The truth is affirmed in its place. This act of erasure and replacement practiced systematically re-educates verbal flow and reduces verbal accidents. To facilitate vigilance, I recommend a word journal. For a week, each time a negative judgment is expressed, write down the exact phrase, the time, and the reason. Reviewing it will reveal a pattern. Certain environments, traffic, household matters, financial conversations, trigger pessimistic language. Knowing the pattern suggests antidotes, preventive decrees before entering those environments. If a traveler murmurs curses when stuck in a tram, they decide to declare upon boarding, I am divine patience and order guiding these cars. The change becomes perceptible because the word creates a vibratory field that influences even the mood of the driver and other passengers. Doubt arises about language and phonetics. It is equally valid to pronounce it in Spanish, English, or Latin. The law listens to the vibration of consciousness, not specific diction. However, the mother tongue usually carries richer emotional resonance and therefore imprints a deeper mark. Some find special strength in Hebrew or Greek biblical terms. They may use them if they awaken reverence, but must ensure the mind understands the meaning, since ignorance reduces the decree to exotic sound. The key is psychological sincerity, a word that is understandable, alive, and felt. Another aspect is continuity. The decree is not abandoned as soon as first shoots appear, just as a gardener does not stop watering a tender plant after seeing a couple of leaves. One continues until the result visibly stabilizes. Afterwards, a brief maintenance version is kept like a pilot light that remains on even after the big flame goes out, ready to rekindle if necessary. In cases of extensive goals, cancelling substantial debt, restoring a damaged relationship, persistence may take months. However, every day offers progress, a cordial call, an unexpected payment, a revealing dream. Observing those signs and affirming, "This confirms my word," nourishes faith and accelerates the outcome. It is essential to mention the word of blessing as a superior form of decree. To bless means to recognize the good present in a person or situation, even when common sense detects shadow. By blessing, one frees the other's best potential and saves oneself from the contagion of criticism. When a neighbor is annoying, the student declares, I bless the Christ in you. It is expressed now as consideration and harmony instead of lamenting their rudeness. I have witnessed genuine character changes in weeks thanks to this practice, without argument or sermon. The one who blesses acts like a tuner who strikes a tuning fork and brings the out-of-tune instrument to vibrate at the correct note. Let us conclude with an integration exercise. Choose a concrete area, health, finances, relationships, and formulate 3 concise decrees based on the requirements above. Write them on a card, carry it in your pocket and repeat them at designated hours. Keep track of manifestations. After 30 days, compare the initial and final situation. The contrast will certify the power of conscious speech and encourage refinement. Father of immutable truth, we acknowledge the privilege of sharing your creative word. We declare that every phrase that springs from our lips reflects your wisdom, builds, heals, and prospers. From today, every conversation becomes a channel of good. Every affirmation of ours vibrates with your power and precipitates realities of order, joy, and abundance. Thank you for speaking in us and through us, and that what we decree in your name appears without delay for the glory of your being and the well-being of all. So it is, so it shall be, so it remains. Chapter 9, Love is a Causal Force. All the law is summed up, Paul affirmed, in a single word, love. He spoke as a spirit who knew Hebrew logic and Greek dialectics. He said it having studied Aramaic and traveled throughout the empire. And yet he concluded that the essence and goal of spiritual science is love. But we are not talking about the fickle emotion poets place alongside the moon, nor the familial attachment dependent on good upbringing and gentle temperament. We refer to arape, the unconditional energy that springs from the principle and pours over the worthy and unworthy alike with equal generosity, because it is the very nature of God projecting without calculation. When Jesus proclaims that he makes the sun rise on both the just and the unjust, he is not describing a sentimental gesture, but explaining the impartial distribution of a causal force that, upon touching the receptive consciousness, fully fulfills the law, dissolving every obstacle just as spring dissolves ice, without argument or violence. Understanding this identity of love with the law is crucial, for it teaches that the act of loving is not limited to private ethical virtue. It is a maneuver of high mental engineering that releases divine power and directs it toward the point of friction, just as an electrician connects a conductor cable to light up a dark room. For the modern intellect, trained in the mechanics of gears and laboratory chemistry, such a statement may seem vague metaphysics. The student demands to know why and how love can heal a body, multiply income, or pacify nations. The explanation lies in the dual structure of the mind presented in previous chapters. The mental law rigorously reproduces the predominant image. The divine law infuses every image with a tendency toward good. Arape love fuses these two operations by eradicating the impression of separation that generates fear, the root of disease, poverty, and violence. When an individual holds a thought of hatred, it declares, "This and I are separate." The obedient mind erects barriers that interrupt the vital flow and precipitate deterioration. By reversing the statement and affirming, "I and these are one in God," love melts the barrier and the current of life resumes its course. The physical, emotional, or economic healing that follows is not an arbitrary miracle, but a restoration of energetic continuity. What appeared to be a tumor reabsorbs because the tissue once again receives the constructive command. What seemed to be an economic deficit resolves because commercial circulation flows without the psychological twist that constricted it. Let us pause on the anatomy of this force to distinguish it from personal affection. Personal affection says, "I love you because you benefit me, or because you belong to my bloodline, or because you give me aesthetic pleasure." It depends on conditions and yields at the first adversity. Arape love declares, "I recognize you, child of God, identical to me, independent of your current behavior." It transcends sympathies because it is based on ontology, not preference. This does not mean denying the gravity of certain human acts. It means that moral judgment is subordinated to spiritual vision. Just as an engineer, when facing a defective foundation, condemns the crack but does not abandon the building. He corrects, reinforces, heals, and this is why Jesus forgives without relativizing error. "Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more." He separates the person from the distortion, restores circulation, and frees the energy of love that corrects the mental deviation, and consequently the external effect. Upon reaching this point, many confess practical difficulty, such as loving the adversary who slanders me, the competitor who steals my clients, or the relative who tramples my patience. Here is the concrete technique. In silence, visualize that person surrounded by golden light. Repeat calmly, "I recognize the eternal Christ in you. I declare that the love of God is now operating in your mind, your heart, and your affairs. I release you and set you free. I am at peace. Do not argue with the imagination if memories of anger arise each time the memory surfaces. Restore the luminous image. At first it may seem a futile effort, like turning a heavy wheel. Persist, and soon you will notice relief in the solar plexus, a sign that resistance is yielding. Within a few days, the external situation begins to change. The adversary moderates their tone or disappears from the scene. If they persist, the words will no longer affect them. The law will have been fulfilled. Love causes rectification, even if the visible form takes paths the personal self could not foresee. Illustrative example. In a factory in New Jersey, two foremen competed with open hostility. Productivity declined, and the owner threatened to fire both. One of them attended our talks and was assigned the exercise described above. For 3 weeks, he mentally blessed his rival, affirming goodwill without telling him verbally. The atmosphere softened. They agreed on a project, and unexpectedly, the plant owner offered them the chance to jointly lead an expanded section, doubling their salary. The other foreman, when questioned, said, "I don't know what happened. Suddenly I realized we were fighting out of stubbornness." The causal force of love, by dissipating the consciousness of conflict, allowed the divine law to express abundance for both. No one gave ground. Rather, the territory expanded. Another objection comes from common psychology. If I love too much, they will take advantage of me. This confuses love with servility. Love includes wisdom. It does not consent to injustice because endorsing abuse perpetuates the illusion of separation, also in the abuser. A mother who loves does not give a knife to a mischievous child. She keeps it and teaches safe use. Likewise, one who practices divine love can say no with a firm but silent voice, without hatred. The inner tone will decide whether the denial builds or destroys. The resentful shout no and raise walls. The firm lover says no, I do not allow this behavior, while maintaining the higher vision of the other, the offender sensing the vibration. They find fertile ground to rectify or naturally walk away. Let us talk about love and prosperity. Wealth flows where there is circulation. Greed contracts channels, and fear of loss poisons the blood of commerce. The small business owner who pays stingy wages under the excuse of economy generates a wave of scarcity that returns to his cash register as lack of sales, while the owner who treats employees fairly and kindly invokes love as a causal force and creates loyal customers, since love impregnates the product and transmits itself as sensory trust. This was proven by a baker in Philadelphia. After hearing me say that love is the most powerful yeast, he began blessing each batch, wishing health to the family that would eat it. In a few months, without changing the recipe, he doubled orders and had to rent an additional oven. Neighbors said the bread tasted different, even though the ingredients were identical. They knew without knowing that the baker's essence had risen. Now consider love and health. Medicine already recognizes that prolonged anger increases adrenaline, alters blood pH, and favors ulcers. Spiritual law goes further. It affirms that love, by restoring a sense of unity, reorganizes cellular masters and corrects autonomic impulses. A doctor at Bellevue Hospital shared a case of an elderly woman with uncontrollable hypertension. Upon reconciling with her daughter, whom she had resented for 20 years, her blood pressure normalized without changing medication. Inner life governs blood chemistry, and love is the supreme regulator. Hence the efficacy of forgiveness, not as a moralizing act, but as physiological restoration. Every grudge is a thorn that first hurts the bearer. Removing it through love unlocks vital force, which rushes to repair tissues like an army of workers awaiting orders to advance. A methodological question arises. Can love be cultivated, or is it innate? The spark resides in all. Developing it requires practice. I propose the concentric circle method. During the first week, extend deliberate love to something easy, a tree, a bird, a pleasant memory. Feel warmth in the chest and say, "The life of God in this being is good and I bless it." Second week, expand to close friends. Third, to neutral acquaintances such as the mailman or shopkeeper. Fourth, to difficult people. The mind will gradually train like the violinist's muscles, strengthening by practicing scales. The spiritual heart gains elasticity by exercising in different directions. By the 6th week, you will notice a spontaneous desire for good, even when hearing news of crime. Instead of reacting with anger, you will issue a creative prayer. That emission, added to other similar currents, forms a social atmosphere that contains evil before it becomes action. Let us move to the doctrinal aspect. There is fear that emphasis on love will relax divine justice. The opposite happens. Justice emanating from love is exact because it flows from the law of cause and effect. Those who see harmony experience consequence, not vindictive punishment, but corrective shock. Loving the transgressor does not mean preventing learning. It means wishing the lesson to be sufficient, not cruel. This principle is glimpsed in courts where wise judges issue proportional sentences accompanied by opportunity for amendment, community work, study, restitution. Love with justice prevents relapse and saves enormous social costs. We do not intend to legislate from the pulpit, only to point out that spiritual science precedes the penal reform humanists discuss, since external laws always follow internal understanding. Integrating what has been stated, we can formulate a practical axiom. Every situation lacking love lacks the key that resolves it. Ask yourself, where is love missing in this problem? To what no do I hold judgment? The crack identified pour conscious love, blessing, gratitude, service, just as welding is poured into a metal joint. Wait. The entire structure will realign because love is a causal force that permeates atoms and orders behavior, not mere moral perfume. Biblical patriarchs, prophets, and great civil reformers intuitively knew this. Mental science articulates it in replicable terms for any citizen. We close with a 7-day exercise. Each night before sleeping, review the day's encounters. Choose the face that evoked irritation. Visualize it wrapped in pink light, a universal symbol of active love, and say, I bless the good in you and release all resistance. I set you free and free myself. Then imagine a future scene of cordiality without forced details. Upon waking, bless in advance all the people who will cross your path. The love of God goes before me and harmonizes this day. Keep a record of surprises, a greeting where there was indifference, unusual speed in errands, relief in digestion. 7 days will suffice to prove that love applied scientifically fulfills the law more effectively than coercion or cunning. Father of immense good, we now recognize that your love is the first cause, the very substance, and the glorious end of all that exists. We entrust to that love our ideas, words, and actions. We allow it to flow unimpeded through our minds, to heal our bodies, multiply our resources, and bless every living being that our thought touches. Thus we manifest the law in its fullness. And the world, feeling this wave of plenitude, responds with peace, health, and prosperity for all. Amen. Chapter 10, Reasoned Faith. When Jesus proclaimed that moving mountains was not an appeal to Oriental fantasy, nor preacher's hyperbole, he was describing the literal operation of universal laws that humanity is only beginning to translate into scientific language. The mountain can be a stubborn tumor lodged in the peritoneum, a mortgage threatening the home, or a psychic habit inherited that clouds generations. The visible texture of the obstacle matters little once one understands that the mind, embracing the certainty that the principle operates without flaw, dictates to the subconscious an order which the cells, finances, or external circumstances obey with geometric docility. But for this to function in modern life, with its crowded trams, urgent telegrams, and skeptical editorials, it must be founded on clear logic, not on vague emotion. Reasoned faith resembles less the leap of an acrobat in the dark, and more the confidence of an engineer who steps on a bridge whose calculations he has reviewed. It differs from sentimental credulity, as minted gold differs from the deceptive shine of mica. Much harm has been done to both soul and intellect by speeches presenting faith as blind abandonment of reason, insinuating that the believer must turn off the lamp of understanding to please God. That division is impossible. The God who designed the neuronal synapse and the number pi could not demand renouncing the faculty of thinking to grant favors. Reasoned faith is born precisely by attentively tracing the line connecting cause and effect in daily experience. When the student observes that each thought fertilized by emotion crystallizes into facts, and that the identity I am engraved on the x-axis summons corresponding external equivalents. He convinces himself that a constant law operates. That conviction, repeated, generates a sensation of certainty, and cultivated certainty becomes faith resting not on childish longing, but on evidence accumulated by careful observation. Yes, reasoned faith is the legitimate daughter of the metaphysical science we have developed. It accepts the premise that God is absolute good, verifies its reflection in small experiments, and after the first results dares to undertake greater projects. A novice chemist does not begin synthesizing complex vaccines. He starts mixing simple reactants to verify colors and precipitations. Similarly, one who wishes to operate reasoned faith should first exercise it in matters the mind classifies as small: finding a parking spot, getting an appointment without delay, calming a passing discomfort. He notes the desire, affirms the relevant truth, releases the image, and observes. Within a few days, he will discover correlations that doubt will label coincidence. Within a few weeks, the accumulation of coincidences will topple doubt like a blizzard toppling a rusted gate. Reason, seeing the pattern repeat, grants its verdict: the law is real. Then faith ceases to be a feigned posture and becomes a mental habit, as spontaneous as breathing. The farmer trusts germination not because he blindly believes, but because thousands of dawns have shown him the process's fidelity. The rain may delay, worms may attack, but the seed, if it receives minimal conditions, sprouts. One who practices spiritual science with similar constancy sees health sprout where there was a gloomy diagnosis. He sees income sprout where the ledger of losses threatened ruin. And above all, he sees serenity sprout where chronic fear once pulsed. To structure this logical certainty, it is helpful to recognize 3 steps: knowledge, experimentation, and testimony. Knowledge provides the guiding idea. God is good, mind is cause, love is unifying energy. Without this foundation, faith becomes reckless superstition. Experimentation submits the idea to practical fieldwork. An affirmation is formed, visualized from the goal, blessed, and released. At first, one chooses territory of little resistance, a smaller payment, relief from a headache, appointment reconciliation. Data are recorded honestly, without manipulating figures to please the inner teacher. Testimony crowns the process. The practitioner narrates to his own heart, and when the time comes, to other seekers, how the law responded. This testimony feeds back into knowledge. The idea, supported by evidence, takes deeper root and becomes operative belief. Thus arises an upward spiral. Each cycle expands faith. Each expansion allows experiments of greater scale, and the new victory strengthens the spiral. Doubt, meanwhile, is not a supernatural enemy. It is simply the habit of thinking negatively, born of previous experiences where the person, ignoring the law, saw their desires frustrated. To dissolve it, it is useful to employ the very reason it appeals to. Objectively analyze how many times fear has improved the situation. The merchant who fears bankruptcy stays awake all night and, far from preventing it, induces errors from exhaustion. The patient who fears relapse reduces immune defenses and precisely facilitates relapse. Reason demonstrates that worry produces no solutions, and this realization weakens doubt's prestige. New evidence follows. The practice of affirmation and gratitude has generated verifiable positive results. Reason against reason, proof against proof. The scale tips in favor of faith. Over time, doubt reveals itself as an echo of outdated teaching, not an authoritative voice. When it appears, as it will, like old nails, the tide drags onto the beach, examine it calmly, with the serene power you possess to uphold the laws you have already tested. Finding no fresh argument, doubt dissipates. It is important to emphasize that reasoned faith does not exclude material action. Rather, it includes it as a natural extension. A farmer who plants with certainty does not stand idly by. He waters, weeds, and protects from pests. But he does so without anguish, knowing that the unseen support guarantees the outcome. Likewise, the student who affirms abundance also prepares the balance sheet, negotiates prudently, and attends to clients. The sick person who declares divine life also follows medical instructions and nourishes the body. The difference is that action no longer arises from defensive panic, but from inspired intuition. The enlightened mind inspires the appropriate means, and the appropriate means are fulfilled with joy, not tension. Such collaboration between the invisible and the visible is the hallmark of reasoned faith. It unites heaven and earth within the person. In matters of health, I often observe that reasoned faith revitalizes treatments that once seemed stagnant. A hospital surgeon from Presbytery told me about a complicated fracture whose healing was delayed. The patient, instructed in these principles, began to affirm, "The tissues now obey the law of perfect order." Far from abandoning either Jesus or asepsis, he cooperated with them from inner certainty. X-rays showed unusual progress after 3 weeks, which the doctor honestly attributed to the patient's excellent attitude. Reason does not reject radiology. It enlightens it with confidence and accelerates physiological processes, following paths that orthodox science is only beginning to measure through studies of hormones and neurotransmitters. A clear illustration is also found in finance. A customs agent, distressed by staff cuts, was to be laid off at 50 years old. We analyzed the facts. His performance was excellent, and his area of expertise was useful in several private shipping companies. We concluded that the mental law could not yield emptiness if he maintained a vision of service. So he adopted the affirmation, "I am a continuous unfolding of practical value. The perfect place calls me now." He reviewed his resume, sent 3 letters, and meanwhile held the image of himself, signing a well-paid contract. 2 weeks later, a Chilean shipping line opened an office and required an expert in import regulations. The agent took the position with a higher salary. When asked if his faith was blind, he replied, "No, it was logical. I knew my worth and that the universe does not waste value. That knowing fit like a key in the right lock." The social impact of reasoned faith deserves a special paragraph. A people dominated by corrosive skepticism experience economic depression, growing crime, and worn-out politics because each citizen, casting shadows, contributes to a collective cloud that stifles initiative. Just as stock market crises are caused by alarmist rumors, social ills multiply where disbelief in the divine reigns. Conversely, communities where leaders and workers share a vision of possibility, one grounded in resource analysis and observation of past successes, build hospitals, dams, and universities. This is not patriotic rhetoric, but mental law multiplied by millions. Therefore, cultivating reasoned faith is not a private devotional luxury, it is civic service. Each thought of certainty sustained by an individual raises the city's moral barometer, a shout upward. 10,000 such thoughts can change the destiny of nations. Coming to concrete practice, I propose a 40-day plan. First, choose a defined goal whose achievement seems to defy your old scheme of impossibility. Second, write down logical reasons why the law can fulfill it. Your divine affiliation, verified cases, your own abilities. Third, formulate a short affirmation in the present tense. There is a perfect solution, and I accept it now. Fourth, dedicate 10 minutes to visualization from the goal as explained in Chapter 7. Fifth, act each day according to arising intuitions, noting steps and results. Sixth, read at night the list of favorable evidence, a letter received, a fresh idea, a casual encounter, and give thanks. Repeated for 40 cycles, you will notice how doubt diminishes and the goal approaches until it becomes almost inevitable. If it still is not fully realized, extend the quarantine to 50 or 60 days. Each extension does not increase fatigue but rest, because reasoned faith, far from exhausting, refreshes the spirit by resting on a solid foundation. Thus understood, faith is the spiritual version of the scientific method. It proposes a hypothesis, God is present good, experiments in reality, affirms, visualizes, acts, and formulates verified law. Every thought aligned with good manifests. The result is certainty that dissolves doubts without theatrical gesture. No mountain of oratory is needed, just sober words, as objective as a surveyor's theodolite. This certainty is what Jesus called knowing the truth, not believing the improbable but experiencing the real. And that experience is within reach of every reader who applies honestly and disciplinedly the principles here discussed. Father of immutable light, we give thanks because the faith you instill in our minds is not a leap into the void, but a step on solid rock. We affirm that your law sustains our plans, directs our affections, and strengthens our bodies. We renounce inherited fear. We see clearly the path traced. We act with calm confidence. Your certainty moves our mountains and turns them into fertile plains where health, prosperity, and peace flourish. So it is by the indestructible logic of your love. Chapter 11. Forgiveness and Transmutation. The human subconscious can be compared to a crystal-clear lake whose surface reflects the sky when calm, but whose bottom, if heavy objects are thrown in, becomes turbid with sediments that slowly release harmful substances and alter the entire ecosystem. These objects are called resentments, guilt, reproaches, and chronic fears. The water's alteration manifests as recurring illnesses, family conflicts, and economic frustrations, which the individual blames on fate without realizing they spring from forgotten psychic deposits. Clearing these residues is not an occasional act, like removing dead leaves in autumn, but a systematic process of forgiveness and transmutation. Forgiveness to neutralize the emotional charge associated with painful memories, transmutation to convert the released energy into a constructive impulse that reopens the divine channel. Until this drainage occurs, every affirmation of prosperity or health encounters an internal blockage that the mental law interprets as a contradictory command. Like a dammed river, the consciousness retains living waters that could irrigate the fields, and in its stagnation breeds microorganisms of failure. It is therefore useful to analyze the anatomy of resentment. It arises when the personal self judges that it has been hurt, offended, or deprived of a rightful good. It records the scene in the emotional archive, and each time the memory surfaces, it reproduces the chemistry of grievance, elevated adrenaline, tense muscles, shallow breathing. The biological body is a faithful archivist and can only process what it receives if the mental input is anger. The metabolism responds with acid if the input is understanding, releasing endorphins. Modern psychologists speak of nuances, but the Bible taught this millennia ago when it warned that hatred harms the bones. However, the problem is not in having felt initial irritation, a common reaction, but in preserving it as a toxic relic. Here enters forgiveness, not as moral absolution of the offender, but as a hygienic decision, to refuse to drink every day the same poisonous reminder. The mind that forgives does not justify the other's behavior. It simply refuses to be bound to it. It is a gesture of legitimate self-love that casts the stone of rage outside the lake and allows the spirit's current to oxygenate the deep waters once again. To carry out this cleansing operation, a method is required since the subconscious, unlike a physical container, does not release sediments with a single shake. I propose the technique of exhaustive inventory. Dedicate an afternoon without interruptions to listing names, dates, or situations that still awaken emotional pain. The teacher who embarrassed you in front of the class, the partner who stole capital, the relative who humiliated you during childhood, guilt over a wrong decision or silent shame that torments secretly. Do not judge whether the offense deserves forgiveness. Record it as memory supplies it. When the list is finished, observe the magnitude of energy invested in sustaining old wounds, and notice that not an iota of that energy has produced value, health, or joy. All has been unproductive consumption. This intellectual recognition paves the way for the next step, the liberating affirmation pronounced name by name. I forgive name, I forgive myself for reason. I surrender all residual feeling to the law. Followed by visualization of each scene wrapped in white light that dissolves images like film exposed to intense light. The first round moves deeply. The second, practiced for 7 consecutive nights, loosens older knots. The third, if necessary, dissolves lightly adhered ones. Often an objection arises. I will forgive when the other changes or apologizes. This condition reveals ignorance of the process. Waiting for external repair is like demanding the river clean itself, while we keep throwing garbage. Forgiveness is a unilateral initiative that does not depend on the offender. It cleans the mind that grants it, and in doing so creates a vibrational environment where the other, if they choose, can more easily correct themselves. Those who cling to offense maintain a psychic link with the aggressor and become slaves to their behavior. Those who forgive cut the invisible rope and regain inner freedom. Upon liberation, the person discovers that the fortress built for protection was actually a prison. Eloy, a merchant ruined by his brother-in-law's fraud, suffered chronic gastritis. After practicing inventory and affirmation for a month, he noticed digestive relief and, to both their surprise, received a partial payment of the debt without demanding it. He said, "When I stopped hating him, he breathed a different air and could take responsibility." The result does not always include monetary restitution, but inner relief and openness to new opportunities are constant. Transmutation is the next positive phase of the same phenomenon. Once the toxic emotion is neutralized, the released energy is redirected toward higher goals. The medieval alchemist sought to turn lead into gold. The metaphysician turns trauma into service. One who suffered childhood rejection upon forgiving finds compassion to help other orphans. One who endured workplace persecution cleanses and creates a company offering fair work. One who went through suffering transforms the experience into understanding that comforts the sick. The law wastes no experience, it recycles it. Thus, karma, understood as the effect of mental causes, transmutes into a weapon, the path of expression of the higher self. Forgiveness is the hinge that turns meaning. Without forgiveness, the wound festers and reproduces new pain. With forgiveness, it welds and becomes muscle that drives character evolution. However, subtle obstacles exist: unconscious guilt and self-accusation. A person may recount forgiveness granted to others, yet carry within a harsh tribunal condemning them for past mistakes. Such guilt works like a thermostat that prevents abundance beyond a certain limit, since the mind, while judging itself unworthy, sabotages projects that contradict its verdict. To cleanse that guilt, apply the same technique: inventory, affirmation, visualization, but with emphasis on the formula, "I forgive myself, I release, and I accept the innocence that God grants me." Some, raised on doctrines of original sin, fear that recognizing innocence means refusing to improve. The opposite happens. Those who know themselves as children of God feel responsible for reflecting the dignity of their lineage and correct behavior with joy, not with a whip. Isaac Newton did not feel burdened by discovering laws because he saw himself as a worm. He was moved by the joy of participating in the divine mind. Another obstacle is voluntary revictimization. People who, after intellectually forgiving, relive the story again to gain social sympathy. The subconscious does not distinguish the motive. It reproduces the old film with its corresponding chemistry. The student must be honest. Once forgiven, cease the morbid narration. One may share testimony to uplift others, but without drama. If an emotional tug is noticed, repeat the cleansing exercise. The mind, like a garden, requires regular weeding. Seeds of resentment can sprout again, but the roots will be weaker and easier to uproot. In the light of scientific prayer, forgiveness becomes a prerequisite for the effectiveness of the decree. Jesus expressed it with simple arithmetic. If you bring your offering to the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, go first to be reconciled, then present your offering. Translated into mental language, if you hold resentment, the energy of your affirmation divides, and the subconscious obeys the stronger vibration, which is usually resentment because it carries years of charge. That is why some people confess to repeating decrees and getting no results. Their emotional deposit contradicts the verbal command. When the channel is cleared, the current flows at astonishing speed, hence testimonies of sudden healings upon forgiving. It is not a capricious miracle, but the removal of a blockage. To consolidate this cleansing, I propose the 21-day method. First week, inventory and nightly affirmation. Second week, review the list each morning. Imagine golden light flowing down the spine and spreading like a river over the name or situation until feeling warmth in the plexus. Third week, every time the mind mentions a forgiven topic, respond, "I bless and release." If a new offense arises during the day, don't wait for night. Apply the formula for 30 seconds. At the end, observe emotional lightness and, above all, openness to new ideas of prosperity. Many discover dormant talents precisely when they have energy previously trapped in resentment. On a collective level, forgiveness has a transcendental function. Wars are born from cultural memories of humiliation that nations venerate as relics. Without transmutation, offenses become resentful anthems. With forgiveness, they turn into lessons to avoid repetition. One who works on their subconscious contributes to the subconscious of their people. The sea receives every drop. Thus, individual cleansing is not escapism, but miniature global pacification. When a teacher frees resentment, their classroom breathes harmony. When a judge issues a verdict without malice, the city feels invisible relief. The future of civilization depends as much on international congresses as on how many citizens practice forgiveness. Forgive before sleeping. During a spiritual retreat in Catskills, I asked dozens of attendees to write forgiveness letters to a deceased person who never heard an apology. The letters were burned in a symbolic fire. The following week, I received telegrams from participants. One resolved an inheritance dispute frozen for 5 years. Another abandoned crutches after 14 months of psychosomatic limping. No one directly contacted the living involved. The subconscious projected a new image, and the universe reflected it. Such testimonies should be in psychotherapy manuals. Conventional science will take time, but will eventually confirm that the brain rewires connections when emotion is purified. Let us conclude with an affirmative prayer. Father of infinite mercy, I recognize your one life in me and in every being. I now declare that any shadow of resentment, guilt, or grievance is exposed to the light of your love and dissolves without residue. I forgive every person, situation, or thought I once perceived as an enemy. I forgive myself for every error made in ignorance. I transmute this energy into service, health, and prosperity for all. My mind is a clean channel. Your good flows freely and abundantly. Thank you, because this is a fact in your eternal now. So it is, so it remains. Amen. Chapter 12, Spiritual Prosperity. The word prosperity, from its Latin root prosperare, means to make things move forward with hope. While most confine it to a balance of coins or the extension of properties, spiritual science contemplates it as a state of consciousness in which good flows without stagnation, taking the form of money, job opportunities, fruitful relationships, and above all, an abundant feeling of inner sufficiency. Money is merely a certificate of services rendered and services possible, a piece of paper that, by collective convention, activates exchanges. When the mind aligns with divine law, this certificate arrives in just proportion because the invisible circulation of thought supports it. If the mind resists through fear or greed, the bills slip away like water through fingers or pile up with the stench of stagnant dams soon to rot. Understanding this principle requires abandoning the superstition that poverty intrinsically dignifies or that wealth essentially degrades. Neither is true. Poverty born of ignorance breeds bitterness. Wealth without universal purpose generates anxiety. The balance lies in recognizing the spirit as a limited source that self-distributes according to the idea each face holds of its abundance, and letting monetary symbols circulate like blood that lubricates the social body without accumulating clots or draining arteries. Let us then examine the mental architecture of prosperity. Everything begins with the concept an individual harbors about God. If God is perceived as an intermittent giver who distributes favors with a changing humor, the subconscious replicates that intermittence in the form of delayed salaries, bounced checks, or seasonal businesses that languish. Conversely, when the mind recognizes God as a continuous flow of good, the subconscious reproduces continuity, chained contracts, always fresh inventiveness, clients arriving before the counter goes empty. Such correlation does not obey esoteric magic. It follows the logic of mental law. The primary image, generous principle or stingy principle, projects onto the screen of personal economy. Hence, the student's first task is to review their intimate theology. They believe, without admitting it, that money soils the spiritual hand. They suspect that asking for a raise is equivalent to robbing a colleague. These beliefs, sedimented since childhood by moralistic sermons and fatalistic proverbs, form a dam that diverts the universal current. The river of life is not offended, but seeks an open channel. If that closes, it skirts the obstacle and fertilizes other people's gardens. The second pillar of spiritual prosperity is the attitude of conscious circulation. Money, like blood, renews when it flows. Hoarding it with anxiety causes financial hypertension that sooner or later explodes into internal devaluation, fear disguised as greed, or into compulsive spending acting as corrective hemorrhage. The prudent student does manage money, yes, but does not idolize coins. They recognize that every dollar spent joyfully returns multiplied because it carries the vibrational signature of the giver. To practice this law, I propose the method of the mental tithe. Before income touches the account, set aside 10% destined for inspired purpose, work of light, direct help, cultural investment, and bless the remaining 90% with the phrase, "You circulate freely and return in a growing torrent." This is not mystical arithmetic. It is training the subconscious to perceive abundance even after letting go of a part. At first, doubts arise. After 3 months of disciplined practice, serene certainty appears, along with unexpected income that the logical mind had not budgeted, forgotten tax refunds, returning clients, minor inventions receiving patents. Anyone who observes this sequence with honor will discover that the mental tithe is truly a seed teaching the internal earth to produce unlimitedly. Related to this is the proper use of commercial imagination. Many declare they desire prosperity, but at the same moment entertain visions of stock market crashes, mass closures, and bankers' conspiracies. This gloomy exercise, repeated daily, acts as a negative affirmation of scarcity and imprints with the same fidelity as positive affirmations. The creative mind does not detect irony. Every emotional picture is a command. Therefore, it is wise to direct imagination to scenes of prosperous circulation, flowing merchandise, letters of thanks, balance sheets with ascending columns, not as childish fantasy, but to engrave the model the law will reproduce. I recommend dedicating 5 minutes each dawn to feeling, not just thinking, gratitude for money already circulating, for the exact sum that covers the day's needs. At nightfall, give thanks for opportunities seen and those still invisible, with conviction that the divine idea works in shadows to sprout at its hour. Within weeks, the mind acquires an optimistic tone that does not deny difficulties, but learns to expect solutions. That expectation awakens practical inventiveness, new sales strategies, alliances with old competitors, night studies that expand skills. Prosperity then no longer depends on celestial lottery. It springs as a logical consequence of a person who thinks as the owner of God's wealth. Now, prosperity without purpose becomes an unbearable burden. Divine law does not support sterile accumulation. It promotes expanding service. Whoever earns more serves more or soon sees how the wealth escapes through legal, medical, or family leaks. The philanthropic banker who funds libraries sees his portfolio grow at almost arithmetic pace. The speculator who strangles the small farmer discovers that plague or tax reform erases his figures. This is not mystical revenge. It is balance. The unique mind distributes resources where they can multiply good. Therefore, before asking for a raise, the reader should ask, how will I improve the lives of others with this extra? The clear answer: educate children, sponsor scholarships, renew machinery to reduce accidents, summons the opportunity of gain that fits. Without an answer, the request dissolves. A young bookseller once asked me how to boost his sales. I advised him to imagine his shop as a neighborhood center of light, to dedicate a free shelf to uplifting books, and to offer a weekly lecture. Within 6 months, he had doubled his revenue. He wanted to know why. I replied, "The law trusts channels that share. We cannot ignore the relationship between prosperity and self-esteem. The subconscious pays an individual exactly the rate they set for themselves. If inside one repeats, 'I am not worth enough,' life grants a salary proportional to that verdict. The remedy is not arrogance, but recognizing intrinsic dignity. A child of God deserves abundant provision to fulfill their cosmic function. Affirm every morning, 'I am an expression of divine wealth, and I receive without limit to give without fear.' This re-educates emotions rooted in poverty. Those living in modest neighborhoods can start change by painting the door, fixing a flower pot on the window, ironing a shirt with care. Such gestures send a signal to the subconscious that the person accepts greater good. Soon, neighbors notice cleanliness and recommend the shop to others. A new step opens. Thus, social elevator begins within the chest before reflecting in promotion paychecks. Some raise an ethical objection, but if everyone seeks to prosper, there will be no clash of interests. The law of abundance responds. The universe has enough matter and energy to dignify every inhabitant. The supposed lack arises from a competitive paradigm, not real deficit. When a researcher invents a vaccine, they do not take anything from the farmer. They add health, enabling the farmer to produce better. Similarly, your personal prosperity will add value to the community if it is based on service. The market, far from being a limited pie, is an expandable ocean. Every new boat does not reduce the water for others. It only requires intelligent governance to navigate without collisions. Spiritual science teaches cooperative competition. Compete against your own mediocrity. Cooperate with others' talents. Let's address the emotional hygiene of wealth. The fear of losing is worse than loss because it paralyzes initiatives. The stock market may fall, but whoever trusts the mental source reinvents themselves. Practice this immunity. When reading headlines about crises, declare, God's substance is inexhaustible. I keep my channel open. Then ask yourself, what service does the world need today? Answering that question generates a product or skill that recession cannot suppress. During the Great Depression, many rediscovered craft skills that replaced imported goods. Some forged lasting industries. The mind convinced of abundance detects opportunities in ruins like Gardner Bumus, finds nourishment in fallen leaves. Finally, consider a specific affirmative prayer for money matters. Combine the elements already studied: silence, identification, fulfilled image, word of gratitude. For example, a bill is due but cash is scarce. So 30 minutes of calm. Affirm, I am an inexhaustible supplier. This obligation is paid promptly and the flow continues. Visualize the receipt marked paid. Feel light, let go, act in order. Call who is needed. Make a reasonable plan. Offer additional service. I have witnessed bills paid the same day by unexpected sales of forgotten furniture, by bonds found in an old drawer, by friends repaying forgotten loans. The universe has infinite channels. Prayer opens the mental door so any of them may arrive. In summary, spiritual prosperity is neither a privilege for a few nor the result of chance. It is a mental current ordered by the vision each one holds of God, of themselves, and the service they render. It flows where there is a channel free of fear, where imagination draws shared good, where gratitude keeps the valve open. Money is neither heresy nor salvation. It is a neutral messenger that obeys the quality of the commission. Train yourself, then, to love it as one loves a good horse, with respect without idolatry, guiding it toward noble goals, and you will find that a pleased life adds roads, companions, and piles of blessing. Father of unlimited abundance, we recognize your eternal flow circulating now through our minds and affairs. We affirm that every useful idea finds support. Every honorable service receives just reward. Every honest need is fulfilled in perfect order. We release all fear of scarcity. We bless every coin entering and leaving our hands, and declare that your wealth manifests for the good of all. So it is. So it will be. So it remains. Chapter 13. Health and Regeneration, Contemporary Medicine, which now scrutinizes the dance of the nucleus and the membrane under the microscope, confirms day by day what prophets intuited without a scalpel. The body is a perpetual procession of atoms, a river that never repeats the same drop. Blood cells renew themselves in weeks, intestinal lining cells in days. Even the seemingly immutable bone structure is entirely replaced in about a decade or two. If the organism is therefore a work in progress and not a rigid statue, it is logical that the mind can intervene in its architecture, ordering the living brick with the authority the architect wields over their workers. However, to achieve this, it is not enough to vaguely wish to feel better. It is necessary to supply the subconscious with a finished blueprint of perfect divine order, engrave it with persistent images, sustain it with congruent emotion, and protect it from discordant impressions whose poison, if it infiltrated, would sabotage the biological scaffolding. The purpose of this chapter is to explain the mechanics of conscious regeneration founded on laws that the laboratory tangentially perceives, and to present a disciplined method to renew every cell to the lullaby of truth, without clashing with official science remedies, but without submitting to its partial vision, when it declares irreparable what to the universal mind is as simple as weaving a new petal on a lily. The first premise states, the cell reproduces the idea that governs it. Just as the artisan follows the blueprint, protoplasm obeys the mental vibration rubbed upon it. Invisible but as real as the musical score that guides violinists in the orchestra. If that vibration is saturated with fear, I have inherited a weak heart, age is catching up. The tissues will read the command and manufacture weakness accordingly. When instead the mind offers an image of vigor, a heart beating with majestic rhythm, joints flexible as reeds, The subconscious translates that score into enzymes, hormones, and nerve currents that restore what seemed lost. Some object. How could a thought weld bone or dissolve infection? They forget that even classical physiology admits the body produces antibodies, growth hormones, and repairing substances in response to electrical and chemical stimuli originating in the brain. We assert that the brain in turn listens to the mind, which, illuminated by spiritual intuition, can dictate a melody of harmony that the flesh hastens to sing. The practical question arises, what kind of image feeds regeneration? It must be clear, concrete, lived from the goal and not towards it, just like in the chapter on creative imagination, but now applied to the cellular territory. The patient does not see themselves trying to walk without a cane. They already see themselves walking up the hill, breathing clean air, greeting the friend climbing behind them. They do not hear stammering, "I feel a little less sick." They hear a peaceful signing, every fiber radiates God's strength. For those fond of symbols, I recommend the metaphor of the temple. Imagine the cells are workers replacing blocks of wood with shining marble. Watch silent scaffolding rise while epithelial carpenters place new beams beneath the skin. That image held for 5 minutes upon waking, and 5 before sleep is worth more than 1,000 detailed anatomy lessons because the subconscious feeds on compact images, not academic treatises. But the image alone requires a catalytic feeling, otherwise it remains like a canvas without pigment. The ideal feeling is anticipatory gratitude, the emotion that proves to the universe we believe the restoration already accomplished before feeling it. By giving thanks, the patient convinces the subconscious that the order has already been accepted. Any residue of anxiety is neutralized, just as the spark plug ignites the exact mixture of air and fuel. To cultivate sincere gratitude, it is not enough to repeat hollow thank yous. One must evoke a pleasant memory, perhaps a childhood afternoon, the scent of freshly baked bread, a melody that always softens the heart, and let that warmth impregnate the image of health. The physiological effect of gratitude is well known. It dilates vessels, oxygenates tissues, regulates the autonomic nervous system. Adjusting emotion and mental picture in unison forms a closed circuit no germ can interfere with, for it finds a vibratory field incompatible with its nature. The third pillar is the rigorous elimination of contrary impressions. Modern minds are bombarded by news of epidemics, carcinomas, and mortality statistics. If the student hears these reports, they must not deny them with childish obstinacy but translate them into instant prayer. This discord does not belong to me. I affirm life for all. By doing so, they are freed from emotional contagion. Likewise, they must avoid conversations of constant complaint that imprint the opposite image. If physical withdrawal is impossible, retreat mentally behind a veil of internal silence and softly repeat, "I am divine order." This attitude, far from selfishness, protects your health and the interlocutor's atmosphere, because thoughts of life are antiseptic that sterilize destructive words. We arrive at the coordinated use of external medicine. Some misunderstand faith and reject material remedies, pretending to prove trust. Others, slaves to chemistry, ridicule the mind. The truth is a bridge. Pharmaceutical preparations are crude vehicles that spiritual intelligence can employ. Whoever takes a tonic blessing, the wisdom that inspired the researcher adds invisible power to the formula. Whoever lies on the operating table and proclaims inner silence facilitates steady hands for the surgeon, reduces bleeding and accelerates healing. Advanced surgeons, even without metaphysical language, certify that confident patients heal at a surprising rate. What we call a miracle is simply the joint action of mental law and physical intervention, free from psychic resistance. To institutionalize the practice, I propose the method of the cellular cycle. We know most tissues renew in 30 days. During that month, the student selects an organ or system, liver, skin, digestive tract, and formulates the affirmation, "Cells of my organ system, you are living temples of God's life. I multiply you now in perfect order." Each morning, they visualize white light descending from the crown down to the organ, saturating it with a rhythmic pulse like a piston pumping fresh oil. After 10 minutes, they close with gratitude. They note in a journal any improvement, no matter how subtle: skin color, lighter digestion, deeper sleep. After 30 days, they move to the next system while maintaining brief reviews of the previous one so the vineyard does not fall into neglect. This procedure, so simple it seems like a game, has restored energy to tuberculous miners, erased stubborn warts combined with prudent diet, and reduced palpable nodules later diagnosed by radiologists as spontaneous regression. No surprise, cells stimulated by a higher plan obey like a ship to the telegraphist on the bridge. Now the body is not an island. It depends on a moral current that feeds it. Resentments, guilt, and anguish tense the solar plexus, slow digestion, acidify the blood, and eventually lodge in synovial joints or arterial walls. Therefore, the emotional cleansing discussed in the previous chapter is not pious decoration, it is indispensable hygiene. The resentful who recites health affirmations sows wheat and tares. The harvest will be confused. The organism needs coherence, thought, feeling, and action aligned. Whoever forgives, loves, and trusts offers osteoblasts, leukocytes, and neurons a favorable atmosphere. They respond with chemical precision no school manual can fully describe. Love in the hour of trial is worth more than quinine because it strengthens the interior while rooting peace that no microbe can withstand. Let us see an illustrative case. In 1947, I treated a violinist with chronic gastric ulcer. Dietary treatment eased symptoms, but the lesion recurred under stress. We discovered a latent resentment against a music critic who had ridiculed his debut years before. We introduced a cycle of forgiveness and visualization of the gastric mucosa as pink silk bathed in golden light. In 2 months, endoscopy confirmed almost total healing. The doctor honest admitted surprise. The violinist confessed, "Imagining the internal part as smooth as the wood of my violin, I felt in tune." The old hurtful notes dissolved. There, perfect synthesis, clear image, noble emotion, physiological result. A technical question arises. Can the mind regenerate amputated tissue? Biology already recognizes this capacity in salamanders. I do not rule out that with greater understanding, man may achieve the equivalent. For now, it suffices to know which internal injuries considered irreversible have yielded to persistent practice. The frontier expands with each generation. It is not advisable to measure another's threshold. Practice and bear witness. The impossible today will be routine tomorrow, like blood transfusion, once ridiculed, now saving soldiers on Korean battlefields. Finally, it is advisable to establish a nightly reprogramming ritual. Before sleeping, lie on your back, place your right hand over your heart and your left hand over your solar plexus. Breathe deeply and mentally declare, "While my body rests, God's life renews every cell. I awaken fresh and vigorous." Then imagine a luminous dawn, hear the song of an imaginary bird, and surrender to sleep. This final command penetrates the subconscious when wakefulness lets down its guard, and the night chemistry, growth hormone, tissue repair, adjusts accordingly. Insomniac patients have found that with a few nights of this practice, the mind calms. Factory workers report waking without their usual morning heaviness. Again, the explanation is simple. The body accepts the order the sentinel delivers before closing the gates. Thus concludes the doctrine of conscious regeneration, image of perfect order, emotional gratitude, protection against discord, cooperation with physical means, daily discipline, ethical cleansing, and nightly decree. It is not a mystical trick but a coherent application of studied principles. Whoever follows it turns the body, temple of the spirit, into a stained glass window through which divine light refracts. It does not guarantee earthly eternity because the soul's evolution transcends the flesh, but it prolongs life, dispels unnecessary ailments, and above all, proves to the community that the mind of Christ is not abstract theory, but practical medicine capable of transforming a sick room into a workshop of joyful service. Father of indestructible life, we now proclaim that your breath passes through every cell. Replace worn matter with radiant tissue and harmonize functions with the pulse of eternity. We thank you for total restoration. We feel your vigor unfold in bones, blood, and nerves, and we radiate this certainty to every sick person seeking relief. We are, in your name, channels of health and regeneration. So it is, so it shall be, so it remains. Chapter 14, Transforming Circumstances. Anyone who has understood that every cell in the body obeys thought cannot continue believing that the fabric of the environment is someone else's cloth. The same law that governs the lung rules the workshop, the home, the neighborhood, and the nation. Because everything visible, wood, brick, bank numbers, the emotional climate in the office, is a projection of the collective mind whose units are individual minds. Thus, transforming external circumstances does not require manipulating them with crude effort. It demands acting on the internal cause, reconfiguring the image that sustains the structure. Many despair before a hostile job, a rundown neighborhood, or an unjust government, and launch feverish campaigns that may bring temporary fixes. But by neglecting the mental matrix, they see the same chaos return disguised with new faces. Spiritual science teaches another strategy. Raise the focus of attention until you can clearly and convincingly conceive with emotion the perfect scene already fulfilled. Maintain it with serene perseverance, then proceed with the action inspired by the Spirit. When one acts this way, the surrounding reality adjusts with surprising precision. Just as photosensitive paper reveals the latent image as soon as it receives the proper light. To operate this reconfiguration, it is useful to deliberately apply the principle of correspondence. Everything that appears outside reflects something operating inside. If the office overflows with murmuring, some habit of criticism still exists in our mind. If the street in front of the house accumulates garbage, we keep a neglected corner in our thoughts. If the business suffers from delinquent customers, perhaps we harbor a feeling of unpaid moral debt. It is not neurotic guilt, it is creative responsibility. The student who observes external discord asks without reproach, what internal pattern sustains this? As soon as they discover the root idea, envy, laxity, fear of loss, they replace it with its opposite, appreciation, order, trust. This substitution is carried out silently through affirmation and visualization. My mind is a channel of harmony. My environment responds with discipline and joy. With constant practice, the murmurers find another target. The street gains a spontaneous cleanup crew and customers settle accounts. This is not magic. It is vibrational coherence. Among the most effective tools stands the master picture. The student dedicates an afternoon to painting with words or drawing the external condition exactly as they desire it. If it concerns the home, they describe bright walls, friendly neighbors, blooming gardens. If it refers to employment, they sketch a department where collaboration and efficiency reign. The picture must exclude possible objections. It includes no names of people to displace, nor details of reform mechanisms. It focuses on the completed result. Once finished, the painting is placed in a private folder and reviewed every morning for 3 minutes, feeling that it is already real. Then it is put away, avoiding comments with skeptics, and daily work continues with vigilant disposition. Any inspiration that leads you to the picture, a conversation, a rental offer, a new work technique, is accepted and executed. I have seen a seamstress recite this method to move from a shady sidewalk to a sunny apartment without raising rent, even managing to convert a noisy warehouse into a disciplined workshop by unexpectedly suggesting soft music during the workday. The picture had predisposed her mind to notice opportunities that were previously invisible. Another instrument is the proactive word over places and objects. When entering a room where disputes once occurred, the student quietly says, "I declare the peace of God here." When receiving official correspondence impregnated with bureaucratic tone, they place their hand on the paper and affirm, "Divine intelligence opens an easy path. Inert molecules are not deaf." The mental vibration united with the word organizes subtle fields, what physicists now call probability waves, and the situation evolves with less friction. A postal worker told how, after daily blessing sacks filled with requests, the office installed mechanized sorting that reduced losses. The supervisor credited it to technical innovation, unaware that the cause lay in the silent prayer that inspired him to demand the budget. There are circumstances whose complexity requires mediating action, conflict between two departments, family disputes, political tension. The student does not intervene by pointing out culprits. They choose in their mind a luminous circle that embraces all contenders and declare, "The one mind of God harmonizes these interests. A fair solution arises now." Then, if appropriate, they offer a conceptual data point or suggest a dialogue table. The energy released by their visions silences hostility and supports the spoken words. A lawyer who practiced this method achieved a counter-prognosis extrajudicial settlement in a 3-year lawsuit. He affirmed for 15 minutes daily, justice and understanding govern both parties. On the morning of the final hearing, one of the companies that previously refused accepted conciliation. The lawyer understood that the minds of the directors tuned to the wave he sustained. It is important to emphasize that transformation does not mean evasion. If a house suffers rising damp, physical repair is essential. However, many fix the wall and shortly thereafter the stain reappears because the mental pattern, lack of clarity, self-neglect, persists. Visible action without change of cause is like painting over rust. The smart approach is to pray, affirm internal cleansing, hire the builder, and watch that the mind remains in order, avoiding blaming the weather or landlord, because complaints reimplant the image of decay. As soon as the attitude changes, the plaster dries and prevails. Some students ask how to transform massive circumstances like inflation or urban violence, where their individual influence seems minimal. The answer lies in the law of group resonance. A clear thought, sustained with altruistic emotion, influences the collective field beyond kilometers and language barriers. History records examples. A day of prayer proclaimed by a leader brings unexpected drops in frontal conflicts. Concerted acts of goodwill reduce summer crime in American cities. Therefore, practice daily omission for 10 minutes. Visualize your nation bathed in the blue light of indivisible justice. Affirm. Divine wisdom guides our rulers. Peace reigns in our streets. Provision covers our homes. It may seem like a drop in the ocean, but joined with thousands of invisible drops, it forms an underground current that suddenly bursts forth in legislative reform or a community program that dismantles gangs. Lasting transformations begin in silent inner work before appearing in the official gazette. Throughout this process, coherence with the law of service is decisive. If one tries to manipulate circumstances for personal gain to the detriment of another, monopolies crushing competitors, campaigns to defeat adversaries, the divine law, though granting immediate success by obeying mental law, will rebalance with later loss, perhaps in an unexpected area. Hence the maxim, if the goal does not bless all involved, rethink it. When the master picture includes the common good, doors open without violence, and transformation flows like dawn that dispels shadows without struggle. I suggest a 40-day reconfiguration method. Day 1, write the master picture of the circumstance to improve. Days 2 to 40. Dedicate 10 morning minutes to visualize the picture. Feel gratitude. Speak the central affirmation. This ideal already works in the visible realm. At the end of each day, note signs, data, encounters, or improvements in someone's mood. If an obstacle arises, declare it a bridge. This delay reveals a hidden justice for my benefit. Upon completing the cycle, compare external reality with the initial description. Rarely will it be identical, but it will reflect the improved essence. I have observed ruined workshops become prosperous, cold marriages regain tenderness, and mediocre students graduate with honors following this plan, because the law responds to constancy, not bursts of enthusiasm. Father of infinite order, we now acknowledge that your mind designs our circumstances, and that by aligning our thoughts with your perfect plan, every external condition is reconfigured in harmony. We affirm that the place where we are fills with light, the work we undertake is full of useful success, and the society we serve progresses toward justice and peace. Thank you because our visions sustained in your name are imprinted without delay upon matter and bring good to all. So it is, so it will be, so it remains. Chapter 15. Service Projecting Divine Thought. The prior work of this book has placed the student at the apex of their own consciousness. They know that the principle operates through their I am, that imagination generates molds, that the word precipitates forms, that love transmutes discord, that reason thought sustains the edifice, that forgiveness clears channels, that prosperity flows, that cells obey, and that circumstances reconfigure when the internal cause receives a new program. Could it then be believed that the goal lies in individual self-perception, a healthy body, comfortable home, guarded finances, and to stop the process there, as if the universe were a private ark to accumulate spiritual treasures? Such a vision would be a dangerous mutilation, because the divine law is never exhausted in particular benefit. It circulates, expands, and multiplies only when the good achieved becomes service that blesses one's neighbor, and by growing radiation, the entire world. The ego may appropriate mental techniques to crown its vanity, but by isolating the flow, it coagulates it. In contrast, Christ consciousness understands that every personal achievement is a fiduciary deposit of the kingdom, and that the only way to keep it is to give it away in the form inspired by the Spirit. Thus, service is not mere sentimental philanthropy. It is the organized projection of omnipotent thought into networks of practical love that nourish the collective, raise planetary vibration, and seal the divine identity with the unmistakable efficacy of light, that in illuminating does not diminish its brilliance. This understanding demands a shift in perspective from the old paradigm, where man asks, "What can I get from the world?" to the Christic axiom, "What can flow through me to the world?" At first glance, such inversion seems like sacrifice. In reality, it is liberation from the subtlest prison, the egocentrism that keeps the mind spinning in a small orbit and repeating problems like a satellite that never leaves the shadow of its asteroid. When one directs thought toward service, the orbit widens, energy renews, and providence entrusts greater resources because it knows it will find a way to distribute them. This explains why some individuals, after dedicating their talents to a noble cause, teaching, healing, research, receive subsidies, ideas, and collaborators in abundance that defy accounting predictions. It is not luck, it is spiritual hydrodynamics. A great flow only reaches an aqueduct that empties into a serene plain. Otherwise, the river would choose a different channel to avoid overflowing and devastation. But how to project that divine thought with scientific method and not fleeting enthusiasm? The process consists of 4 phases: clear design of the service, mental impregnation, ordered action, and sustained expansion. It begins with clear design. The mind formulates the specific good it wishes to see materialized outside its personal orbit. A community library, a food program, a training manual, a workplace equity environment, a symphony that elevates dormant sensitivities. This vision must meet 2 requirements: respond to a real need and harmonize with the servant's attitude. The law would reject a whimsical plan that ignores context, just as nature prevents a dolphin from climbing a cedar tree. By discerning need and gift, the student writes a detailed paragraph describing the completed work, number of beneficiaries, motivating atmosphere, and verifiable fruits. They place that description in the secret chamber of their mind, the I am room, and move to the second phase. Mental impregnation means sustaining the vision of service with the same technique used for health or prosperity, but with an altruistic intensity that adds a higher vibratory octave. Each morning for 10 minutes, the practitioner contemplates the work functioning: children reading with bright eyes, patients receiving medicines, workers using safe tools, music lovers transformed by unprecedented chords. They breathe gratitude because that already exists in the divine mind. They affirm, "I am an inexhaustible channel of provision and wisdom for this work." The dominant emotion is not pride, but serene joy. This impregnation engraves in the subconscious not only the image, but also the conviction that resources are given. This point is crucial because the mind, still subject to the small self, will ask, "Where will funds and collaborators come from?" The answer is, "I anticipate they come right now in perfect form." Thus, the internal matrix prepares to recognize opportunities that previously went unnoticed. The third phase, ordered action, translates invisible energy into tangible steps. Here, the servant consults their intuition and acts with the same discipline the architect applies to an approved plan. They may begin with a humble gesture, donating their own book, visiting a hospital, calling the first meeting, but execute it with excellence, knowing that every brick vibrates with the quality of the temple. They do not distress if the initial response is lukewarm. They remember that a mental wave needs time to impregnate another's consciousness. They persevere, record progress, and give thanks. When obstacles arise, bureaucratic rejection, temporary scarcity, they do not judge defeat but reinterpret it. This stone reveals an adjustment and pushes them to refine the plan. They make corrections and continue. The law supports a flexible mind, resists a stubborn mind. Once the first manifestation consolidates, a small reading room, a free therapy group, a well-received musical rehearsal, The phase of sustained expansion begins. A new description is formed, covering more ground but without losing its essence. The mental impregnation is repeated, additional corridors are added, substitutes are trained to avoid personalization. The servant resists the temptation to control every thread, delegates trust supervises with love, not possessive zeal. They know the work belongs to the conscious Christ, not the ego. Soon it multiplies into replicas, another library, another clinic, a youth orchestra. The casual observer might call this a franchise. Spiritual science calls it the principle of infinite replication, the mental equivalent of healthy cellular growth. Some fear that sustained service will drain personal energies. The opposite happens. The heavenly channel receives fresh flow, and their health, far from diminishing, grows stronger. This does not mean ignoring rest. It means rest is deep because consciousness free from selfishness does not create useless tensions. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he did not suffer neurotic exhaustion. He dismissed the crowd and crossed the shore, a renewal that preluded the following miracles. Anyone directing a charitable program must imitate that cycle: concentrated giving and meditative withdrawal. The projected divine thought is alternating current, giving and receiving, and any imbalance causes a physical or financial short circuit. At this point, it is important to warn against two deviations: servility and vainglory. Servility appears when an individual confuses service with self-denial without discernment, squeezing themselves until their dignity is harmed or tolerating organizational abuse. Wise love maintains self-respect and teaches by example that serving is not groveling. It reflects the authority of the principle in the form of order, efficiency, and, if necessary, firmness against exploitation disguised as a cause. Vainglory arises when results, applause, media coverage, and plaques deceive the ego into believing it is the source of the miracle. The antidote? Daily remind yourself you are a channel, not a fountain. Those who know they are channels allow praise to flow past, give thanks, and direct credit to the Spirit, thus avoiding energy leakage that sooner or later would translate into corrective failures arising from the very law they try to idolize. The projection of divine thought is not limited to formal works. It includes the silent radiation that a compassionate heart exerts on passers-by. Walking down the avenue mentally blessing strangers, boarding a tram and wishing, "I am peace in this vehicle." Entering a courthouse and affirming divine justice manifests here, transforming shops, classrooms, and courts into momentary temples where, without ritual or publicity, a higher frequency is installed. I have witnessed irritated lines turn courteous when two practitioners, by mutual agreement, place the crowd within an imaginary oval of green light while silently repeating, "Love and patience prevail." The law of radiation does not require external verification. However, the coherence of the effects confirms that something moves on a subtle plane and densifies into behaviors. Service, thus understood, inaugurates the economy of good. The more constructive thought is shared, the greater the capacity to share increases. The intellect expands, the heart beats with joyful rhythm. Material resources are just like a shadow to the body because the divine mind cares for its own purpose. And the world, desperate for hope, finds in the servant's face a beacon of light that contradicts headlines of despair. It does not matter that major newspapers ignore the invisible work. The substance of those victories circulates through humanity's nerves silently, reducing violence rates, improving health policies, tempering economic cycles. Someday, sociologists will trace statistical correlation between collective prayers and macro-social phenomena. Meanwhile, the servant works with intimate certainty. We close the work with practical imitation. Choose the reader now, a field where your talent and another's need intersect. Write a vibrant description. Imbue your mind morning and night. Act today with small but firm steps. Maintain the habit for 40 days. Observe, adjust, multiply. Do not wait for titles, funds, or universal consensus. Projected divine thought precedes visible sponsorship. God signs checks in faith. The world endorses them when presented with humble conviction. Universal Father, source of all good, we consecrate our minds, our hands, and our voices to the work of blessing. We offer ourselves as conscious channels of your wisdom, your peace, and your abundance, so that every creature touched by our thought feels relief, and every corner reached by our actions is illuminated. Guide our plans, provide the means, and preserve the purity of our purpose, so that the service rendered is a faithful mirror of your eternal perception. So it is given, so it remains. Amen.